I found it in his suitcase while looking for his passport, a receipt from Tiffany's for a diamond pendant necklace I'd never seen. The paper trembled between my fingers as I stared at the date. 2 weeks ago. Our 5th anniversary wasn't for months. The autumn morning light streamed through our bedroom windows, casting shadows across the cream carpet where Matthew's half-packed suitcase lay open. He was rushing to catch his flight to Chicago, shouting about missing documents from the bathroom where the shower still ran. "Meredith, did you find it?" His voice echoed off tile. I slipped the receipt into my pocket, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Still looking." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. The necklace cost more than our monthly mortgage payment. In 5 years together, Matthew had never spent that kind of money on jewelry, not even for my engagement ring, which he'd proudly called sensibly elegant when he proposed. I mechanically continued rifling through his belongings, finding the passport tucked beneath a folded dress shirt. The familiar scent of his cologne clung to the fabric, usually comforting, but now somehow cloying. "Got it!" I called out, forcing brightness into my voice. My fingers felt numb. Matthew emerged in a cloud of steam, towel around his waist, water beating on his shoulders. He smiled, that same warm smile that had made me fall for him at that charity auction years ago. "You're a lifesaver, babe." He kissed my cheek, and I fought the urge to flinch. I watched him dress with methodical efficiency. Charcoal suit, pale blue shirt, the silver tie clip I'd given him last Christmas. Each familiar gesture felt like a stranger's movements now. "The Anderson meeting shouldn't run late," he said, checking his phone. "Want to do dinner when I'm back? That new Italian place you mentioned?" "Sure," I said, my voice steady despite the acid churning in my stomach. "Text me when you land?" He was already heading for the door, rolling his suitcase. "Always do. Love you." The front door clicked shut. I waited until his car engine faded before pulling out the receipt, studying it like it might reveal new secrets. The price, the date, the item description that revealed nothing about its intended recipient. My phone buzzed. A text from Noelle. "Coffee? Need your marketing genius for this pitch." I stared at the message, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Noelle had been my closest friend since college. She knew Matthew almost as well as I did, or thought she did. "Can't today. Deadline." Another lie, easier than the first. I called the office instead, my voice remarkably composed as I told them I was taking a sick day. Then I opened my laptop and pulled up our joint credit card statement. 3 hours later, my eyes were burning from staring at the screen. I'd found more: dinner charges at restaurants we'd never visited together, a hotel booking downtown on a night he'd claimed to be working late, small purchases at shops I didn't recognize. Each discovery was a fresh crack in the foundation of everything I'd believed about us. My phone lit up with a text from Matthew. "Landed safe. Missing you already." I set the phone face down without responding. The diamond pendant was out there somewhere, probably nestled against someone else's collarbone. Someone who had dinner with my husband at candlelit restaurants while I worked late, believing his excuses about client meetings. The receipt felt heavy in my pocket, a paper weapon that had shattered 5 years of trust in an instant. I thought about confronting him immediately, demanding answers, but something deeper, colder, was taking root beneath the hurt. I opened a new browser tab and typed Tiffany's into the search bar. The pendant would have a serial number, the store would have records, and next week was the annual industry gala, the perfect opportunity to see who might be wearing a brand new diamond necklace. My hands had stopped shaking. The initial shock was crystallizing into something else, a clarity I'd never felt before. Matthew thought he was so careful, so clever with his secrets. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I picked up my phone and opened my calendar, scrolling to next Friday's gala. Time to start planning my outfit. After all, if I was going to watch my marriage implode in public, I wanted to look absolutely devastating doing it. The cursor blinked on the calendar entry as I added a note. Wear red. Red for rage. Red for revenge. Red for the blood he'd never see coming. The gala invitation mocked me from my desk. Thick cream cardstock with gold lettering, promising an evening of celebration and connection. I'd spent the past week methodically preparing, letting the anger simmer beneath a carefully maintained facade of normalcy. Matthew noticed nothing different when he returned from Chicago. He brought me a box of artisanal chocolates, kissed me like always, and slipped seamlessly back into our routine. Each gesture felt like sandpaper against my skin. "You're sure you want to go tonight?" he asked, adjusting his bow tie in our bedroom mirror. "You've seemed tired lately." I smoothed my red dress, a weapon disguised as silk. "Wouldn't miss it. Besides, the Morrison account team will all be there." I watched his reflection carefully, including Gianna. His hands paused fractionally on the tie. Right, good networking opportunity. I'd spent hours choosing this dress, knowing exactly how it would hit every curve. The neckline dipped just low enough to make the absence of any necklace conspicuous. Let him notice. Let him wonder. The ballroom at the Riverside Hotel dripped with crystal and pretense. I recognized faces from a dozen different firms, all playing the same game of corporate musical chairs. Matthew's hand rested at the small of my back as we worked the room, but I felt each time his eyes drifted away, scanning the crowd. "Meredith!" Gianna's voice cut through the chamber music. She air-kissed my cheek, champagne glass dangling from manicured fingers. "That dress is absolutely killer." I hugged her closer than necessary, noting how she stiffened slightly. "Thanks. Love your necklace. Is it new?" Her hand flew to her throat, to the simple pearl pendant that definitely wasn't from Tiffany's. "Oh, this old thing. Had it forever." Matthew had drifted away, deep in conversation with Patrick near the bar. I kept Gianna close, letting the champagne loosen her tongue. "How's the Morrison project going? Must be intense all those late nights." "What late nights?" She frowned. "We wrapped that weeks ago. Matthew's been focused on the new healthcare client." Ice spread through my chest. He'd used the Morrison project as an excuse for 3 dinner meetings last month. "Of course," I said smoothly. "I must be mixing up projects. Speaking of Matthew, have you met Susan from his team? I've been dying to connect with her about their marketing strategy." Gianna's glass froze halfway to her lips. "Susan? I don't... Oh." Her eyes widened with sudden recognition. "You mean Susan from the Chicago office?" The room tilted slightly. "Yes," I lied. "Exactly. I just met her last week when she was in town. Gorgeous woman, has this stunning diamond pendant she was showing off. Said it was a gift from..." Gianna's voice trailed off as she finally registered my expression. Horror crept across her face. "Oh God, oh God, Meredith, I didn't..." "Excuse me," I managed, turning away. The crowd seemed to pulse around me, faces blurring. I needed air. I pushed through the French doors onto the terrace, gripping the stone balustrade. The night air was sharp with approaching winter. Behind me, the party continued its glittering charade, while my world splintered into before and after. "Meredith?" Patrick's voice. I hadn't heard him follow me out. "You okay?" I turned, ready to brush him off, but stopped at his expression. He knew. Of course he knew. He and Matthew had weekly squash games, drinks after work. How many others knew? How long had I been the only one not seeing it? How long? My voice was barely a whisper. Patrick shifted uncomfortably. "I shouldn't..." "How long?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Since the Chicago merger. About 8 months. 8 months, While I'd been planning weekend trips and talking about starting a family, Matthew had been building a whole separate life. Every kiss, every I love you, every shared moment had been a lie. I'm so sorry, Patrick started, but I cut him off with a laugh that sounded nothing like me. Don't be. I needed to know. I straightened my spine, letting the fury crystallize into purpose. And now I do. I walked back into the ballroom, my heels clicking against marble. Matthew was by the bar, checking his phone, probably texting her, Susan with her diamond pendant and her 8 months of secret dinners. He looked up as I approached, smile faltering at whatever he saw in my face. Everything all right? I took his champagne glass, draining it in one smooth motion. Perfect, I said, setting it down with a decisive click. Everything is absolutely perfect. And it was, in a way, because now I knew exactly what I had to do. I waited 3 days after the gala before calling Noelle, long enough to ensure my voice wouldn't shake. She answered on the first ring. Finally, I was starting to think you'd fallen into a marketing black hole. Can you meet? I kept my tone casual. That new coffee place on Maple? There was a pause. Noelle had known me long enough to hear what I wasn't saying. Give me 20 minutes. The cafe was quiet for a Sunday morning. Noelle took one look at my face and ordered us both double espressos. We claimed a corner table, and I pulled out the Tiffany's receipt, now worn from constant handling. Her eyes widened as she read it. Oh, honey, that's not all. The words spilled out. The gala, Gianna's accidental revelation, Patrick's confirmation. Noelle listened without interrupting, her fingers white-knuckled around her cup. 8 months, she finally said. That absolute bastard. I need your help. I leaned forward. You handle background checks for your firm. I need to know everything about Susan from the Chicago office. Noelle set her cup down carefully. Are you sure that's the right move? Right? I laughed, the sound brittle. Nothing about this is right, but I need to know what I'm dealing with. No, you need to confront Matthew, or talk to a lawyer, or I need to understand exactly what he's built behind my back before I tear it down. The intensity in my voice made a nearby customer glance over. Noelle studied me for a long moment. This isn't you, Mare. The plotting, the revenge. You're better than this. Maybe I'm tired of being better. I pulled out my phone, showing her the hotel charges I'd found. While I was better, he was building a life with someone else. Being better just made me easier to fool. Okay, she held up her hands. But promise me you'll be careful. Whatever you're planning, just be careful. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Because the truth was, I didn't feel careful. I felt like a bomb with a lit fuse, counting down to detonation. Back home, I started my own investigation. LinkedIn revealed a Susan matching Gianna's description, recently promoted to regional director. Her profile showed she'd been in town the same weeks as Matthew's late meetings. Each confirmation was another twist of the knife. I was so focused on my screen that I almost missed the sound of keys in the door. Matthew was home early. Hey, beautiful. He dropped a kiss on my head. Working on a Sunday? I closed the laptop, forcing a smile. Just getting ahead on some things. My heart was racing, but not from fear, from anticipation. How was squash with Patrick? Good match. He's getting better. Matthew headed for the kitchen, but I caught the slight hesitation in his step. Really? Because I ran into him at the grocery store an hour ago. He seemed surprised you hadn't called to reschedule. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Right, sorry. It was tennis with Mark today. I'm getting my days mixed up. I watched him pull out ingredients for dinner, his movements deliberately casual. Every lie now stood out like neon signs. How had I ever missed them? My phone buzzed. A text from Noelle. Found something. Call me ASAP. I need to take this. I told Matthew, heading for our bedroom. Work thing. I closed the door before calling Noelle. What did you find? It's not what I found. It's what I didn't find. Her voice was tense. There is no Susan in the Chicago office. Not now, not in the past year. But Gianna met someone who called herself Susan. But whoever she is, she doesn't work for the company. The implications hit me like a physical blow. The lies went deeper than I'd imagined. Who was this woman? What else didn't I know? Mur, you still there? Yeah. I sank onto the bed, staring at my reflection in the dresser mirror. A stranger stared back, someone harder, colder. I need one more favor. Can you get me the security footage from the Riverside Hotel, the night of the gala? What are you thinking? Gianna said she met Susan last week. If she was at the gala, my voice hardened. I want to see her face. In the kitchen, I could hear Matthew humming as he cooked, playing his role of devoted husband. Let him pretend. Let him think he still held all the cards. Because now I knew this wasn't just about an affair. This was about a carefully constructed fiction, and I was going to dismantle it piece by piece until nothing remained but the truth. The security footage from the gala filled my laptop screen, ghostly figures in evening wear drifting through the frame. I'd been watching for hours, scrutinizing every woman who approached Matthew. Noelle had pulled strings to get the files, but the image quality was frustratingly grainy. A knock at my office door made me jump. Come in! Olive from accounting stepped in, clutching a stack of papers. Sorry to interrupt, but I need your signature on these expense reports. She paused, frowning at my screen. Is that the gala? I started to minimize the window, then stopped. Olive had been there that night. Actually, did you happen to notice a woman talking to Matthew? Tall, dark hair, probably wearing something expensive. Something flickered across her face. You mean Susan? My heart stopped. You know her? Olive shifted uncomfortably. I've seen her around. She comes to the office sometimes, usually late afternoons. Always goes straight to Patrick's office. Patrick. Of course. He wasn't just covering for Matthew. He was actively helping him. The betrayal burned fresh. When was the last time? Tuesday? Olive set down the expense reports. Listen, Meredith, I should have said something sooner. It felt wrong watching them all pretend. Them all? The words came out sharp. She sank into the chair across from my desk. There's a whole group that knows. Patrick, Gianna, some others. They do happy hours at Maxwell's downtown. I got invited once, but it felt, I don't know, like being part of something dirty. My hands were trembling. I'd imagined Matthew's betrayal as something contained, just him and this mystery woman. But this was a conspiracy of silence, a web of complicity that included people I saw every day. Show me, I said, pulling up the footage again. Where is she in this? Olive leaned forward, scanning the screen. There, by the bar in the blue dress, that's her. I froze the frame. The woman was facing away, but something about her posture seemed familiar. She was talking to Patrick, one hand resting possessively on his arm. Wait. I rewound further, watching her movements through the crowd. She never fully faced the camera, but her gestures, the way she carried herself. I know her. What? I've met her before, at the Christmas party last year. Patrick introduced her as his sister. Olive's eyes widened. That's impossible. Patrick's sister lives in Australia. He talks about her all the time. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Patrick hadn't just been covering for Matthew. He'd been actively creating her cover story, lending legitimacy to her presence. How many other lies had they constructed? My phone buzzed. A text from Matthew. Working late tonight, don't wait up. I showed it to Olive. Maxwell's? She nodded slowly. Probably. I need a favor. I met her eyes. A big one. 20 minutes later, I watched through Maxwell's front window as Matthew arrived. He headed straight for a corner booth where Patrick was already waiting. No sign of Susan yet. "Are you sure about this?" Olive whispered beside me. I touched the phone in my pocket, recording everything. Completely. We went inside, choosing a table with a clear view. Matthew's back was to us, but I could see Patrick's face as he looked up and saw us. The color drained from his cheeks. "Showtime," I murmured. I stood, walking deliberately toward their table. Matthew was mid-sentence when he sensed my presence. He turned, surprise flickering across his face before he controlled it. What are you doing here?" "Funny," I said, my voice carrying. "I was about to ask you the same thing. Thought you were working late." "I am. Just a quick drink with Patrick to discuss the Henderson proposal." "Really?" I turned to Patrick. "Or are we waiting for your sister, the one from Australia?" Patrick's glass slipped, spilling whiskey across the table. Matthew went very still. "Meredith," he started, but I cut him off. Just don't." I placed my phone on the table, the recording still running. "I want to meet her, the real her, or the next conversation we have will be with HR." The threat hung in the air. Patrick looked between us, panic rising in his eyes. But Matthew's expression had changed to something calculating. "Okay," he said quietly. "You want the truth? Come back tomorrow night, same time." "Why not now?" His smile was cold. "Because, darling, there are some things you're not ready to hear." I matched his stare. "Tomorrow, then." Walking away, I could feel their eyes on my back. Olive waited by the door, concern etched on her face. But beneath the fear and anger, something else was growing. A fierce satisfaction. Because tomorrow, finally, the masks would come off, and I was ready to face whatever truth lay beneath. I spent the day watching the clock, every minute crawling by like honey. Noelle called twice, but I let it go to voicemail. I couldn't handle her concern, her warnings about being careful. Careful was for people who still had something to lose. At 6, I left the office without saying goodbye to anyone. The autumn air had turned bitter, matching my mood. Maxwell's neon sign buzzed in the growing darkness, a red glow that seemed to pulse with my heartbeat. They were already there, Matthew, Patrick, and a woman with dark hair sitting between them. My hands clenched involuntarily as I recognized her profile from the security footage. She looked up as I approached, and the world tilted sideways. "Hello, Meredith," said Susan Roberts, my mother-in-law, the woman who had died in a car accident 12 years ago. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. "This is impossible." "Sit down," Matthew said quietly. "Please." I sank into the chair, staring at the ghost across from me. She looked different from the photos Matthew kept. Older, harder somehow, but unmistakably the same woman. "You're dead," I managed. "He told me you were dead?" "He told everyone that." Susan's voice was exactly as I'd imagined it from Matthew's stories. It was easier than explaining the truth. "Which is?" Matthew reached for my hand. I yanked it away. "Don't." "I had to protect her," he said. "After what happened with Dad's company, the investigations, she would have lost everything. The embezzlement scandal." The pieces started clicking together. "But that was a cover story," Susan finished. "Robert wasn't embezzling. He was gathering evidence against the board. They were laundering money for some very dangerous people." She smiled without humor. "Then he had his accident, and I knew I was next." My head was spinning. "So you faked your death?" "Matthew helped me disappear. New identity, new life. It was supposed to be temporary, just until we could prove what really happened. But the deeper we dug..." She shook her head. "Patrick's been helping," Matthew added. His security clearance gives us access to records we need. We're close to having enough evidence to go public. Close? My laugh sounded hysterical even to me. You've been close for 8 months while lying to my face every day? I couldn't tell you, he pleaded. It wasn't safe. If they knew you knew. Shut up. I turned to Susan. The necklace, was that some kind of signal? She touched her throat where the diamond pendant hung. A dead drop. The USB drive is inside. Next week's board meeting is our chance to finally expose everything. How convenient. I stood up, my chair scraping back. You know what I think? I think you're both lying. Again. I think this is just another story to cover up whatever's really going on. Meredith, wait. Matthew reached for me. Don't touch me. Several heads turned at my outburst. You let me believe you were having an affair. You let me think I was crazy, paranoid, imagining things. Do you have any idea what that did to me? It was better than making you an accomplice, Susan said sharply. Better than putting you in danger. Better for who? The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over. You got to play dead mother-in-law's spy games while I planned our future, while I talked about having children with a man who couldn't even tell me the truth about his own mother. Matthew's face crumpled. I wanted to tell you so many times. But you didn't. I wiped my eyes roughly. And now you never have to, because I'm done. You can't leave, Susan said urgently. Not now. If they think you know something, then what? They'll arrange an accident for me too? I laughed bitterly. Good luck explaining that one to your next wife, Matthew. I turned to go, but Susan's next words froze me in place. They're already watching you. Have been since the gala. Your friend Olive? She doesn't work for accounting. She works for them. The room seemed to tilt again. Olive's convenient appearance, her helpful information, her eagerness to assist. You're lying. Check your phone, Patrick said quietly. The recording from last night? It's gone. She took it while you were in the bathroom. My fingers trembled as I pulled out my phone. The recording was gone. All my recent calls, texts, photos, erased. So what now? My voice sounded distant to my own ears. Now, Susan said, you sit back down, and we figure out how to keep you alive long enough to finish this. I sank back into my chair, looking at these familiar strangers around me. My husband, my dead mother-in-law, my friend the secret agent. Tell me everything, I said, and this time don't leave anything out. The safe house was a bland apartment in a forgettable building. I sat on a threadbare couch while Susan laid out files across the coffee table, bank statements, emails, surveillance photos, evidence of a conspiracy that had been growing under my feet like toxic roots. The board meeting is in 3 days, she explained. Once we present this, they'll have no choice but to. A knock at the door silenced her. 3 sharp raps, then 2 soft ones. Patrick's signal. But when the door opened, it wasn't just Patrick who entered. Noelle? My voice cracked. What are you doing here? She stepped inside, looking grimmer than I'd ever seen her. Cleaning up a mess. You should have stayed out of it, Mir. Understanding hit like a physical blow. You're one of them. Not exactly. She glanced at Susan. I'm FBI. Deep cover for the past 3 years, investigating the same people you are, until you started poking around and nearly blew everything. I looked at Matthew, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Did you know? Not until tonight, he said quietly. She contacted us after you left Maxwell's. Noelle sat across from me, her familiar face now strange with secrets. Those background checks you asked for? They set off every alarm we had. We've been building this case for years, and suddenly my best friend is digging into exactly the wrong places. Your best friend. The words tasted like ash. Was any of it real? All of it. She reached for my hand. I pulled away. That's why this is so hard. I need you to step back, Mare. Let us handle it. Step back? I gestured at the files. I'm already in it. Olive is being handled, Patrick interrupted. We've fed her false information. As far as they know, you're just a jealous wife chasing shadows. My laugh had an edge of hysteria. That's exactly what I was. Until an hour ago, I thought my husband was having an affair with his dead mother. Keep your voice down, Susan warned. Or what? More accidents? More lies? I stood up, pacing. How many more people are watching me? How much of my life is even real anymore? All of it was real, Matthew said softly. Everything between us. I just couldn't. If you say you couldn't tell me one more time, I swear to God. We need to move, Noelle cut in. They're expecting suspicious activity around the board meeting. We have to get the evidence in place tonight. No. The word surprised even me. Excuse me? I said no. Clarity was crystallizing through the chaos. You don't get to sideline me now. Not after everything. Meredith, Susan started, but I cut her off. They're watching me, right? Expecting the jealous wife act? A plan was forming. So let's give them what they expect. Understanding dawned on Noelle's face. You want to be the distraction. I want to be myself. I turned to Matthew. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to make a scene at your office. A big one. Very public, very messy. The kind of thing a woman who just discovered her husband's affair would do. While we move the evidence, Patrick nodded slowly. They'll be focused on you. It's too dangerous, Matthew protested. More dangerous than letting me stumble around in the dark? I met his eyes. You wanted to protect me by keeping me ignorant. Look how well that worked out. Silence fell as they considered. Finally, Noelle spoke. It could work, but there's no going back after this. Your life as you knew it? My life as I knew it ended the moment I found that receipt. I picked up one of the surveillance photos. At least now I get to choose how it ends. Susan was watching me with new respect. You understand what you're risking? Better than you did when you let me marry your son without knowing the truth. The words hit their mark. She flinched slightly. Tomorrow morning then, Noelle said. 9 a.m.? I nodded, already planning. I'll need my red dress. The one from the gala? Matthew asked. Seems fitting. I managed a bitter smile. I bought it to confront your mistress. Might as well wear it to confront your mother. Later, driving home through empty streets, Matthew tried to speak several times. I kept the radio on, drowning him out. Let him sit with the silence for once. My phone buzzed. A text from Olive. Drinks tomorrow? Need to talk about what happened at Maxwell's. I showed it to Matthew. He tensed. Don't respond. I know how to play my part, I said coldly. I've had plenty of practice. Tomorrow, I would become what they all expected. The hysterical, betrayed wife making a public scene. But behind the performance would be something else. Something harder. Something real. Because now I knew the truth. And the truth, it turns out, was far more dangerous than any lie. The elevator doors opened onto the 32nd floor at exactly 9:07 a.m. My red dress was a battle flag, my heels striking marble like warning shots. Conversations died as I passed. Someone whispered, "Oh shit, good, let them watch." Matthew's office door was closed. Through the glass wall, I could see him at his desk, performing his role perfectly. The unsuspecting husband about to be publicly destroyed. I didn't knock. How dare you? My voice carried across the suddenly silent floor. How dare you sit there pretending everything's normal? He looked up, practiced surprise on his face. Meredith, what are you? Don't. I slammed my hands on his desk, sending papers flying. I know about her, about all of it. Movement in my peripheral vision. Olive appearing in the doorway, phone raised. Recording just as we'd predicted. "This isn't the place," Matthew said, standing. "Let's talk about this at home." Like we talked about the necklace? I picked up his framed photos, examining them with exaggerated care. Or the late meetings, or should we talk about your mother? His flinch wasn't entirely acting. Around us, the audience grew. "You're upset," he tried. "I understand, but—" I hurled the frame. It shattered against the wall, glass tinkling like wind chimes. Someone gasped. "Upset?" I laughed, the sound raw. "I'm way past upset, Matthew. I'm at the part where I burn everything down." Right on cue, Patrick appeared. "Security's on their way. Meredith, you need to leave." Perfect timing. I rounded on him. "Tell them about the happy hours at Maxwell's. Tell them what you've been helping him hide." Patrick's face drained of color, also not entirely acting. Behind him, I caught a glimpse of Noelle slipping into the conference room where the board would meet in 20 minutes. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned, until Olive stepped forward. "I think," she said quietly, "we should all calm down and discuss this privately." Something in her tone made my skin crawl. This wasn't the script. Nothing left to discuss. I moved toward the door, but she blocked my path. "Actually," her smile was razor sharp, "I insist." The gun appeared so smoothly, it seemed to materialize in her hand. Gasps and screams erupted as people scrambled back. "Inside," she gestured to the conference room with the weapon. "All of you." My heart hammered as Matthew and Patrick flanked me, moving slowly toward the door. This wasn't part of the plan. Noelle was in there, vulnerable, with the evidence. The conference room was already occupied. 3 men in suits stood around the table. In the corner, Noelle knelt with her hands zip-tied, a bruise darkening her cheek. "Quite a performance," one of the men said, examining a USB drive, the one from Susan's necklace. "But ultimately unnecessary. We've been ahead of you the whole time." "Not quite." The voice came from behind us. Susan stood in the doorway, her own weapon trained on Olive. "Drop it." Olive's laugh was cold. "Or what? You'll shoot me in front of all these witnesses? They're still filming, you know." She nodded toward the glass walls where horrified faces pressed against the windows. "They're filming exactly what we wanted them to film," I said, understanding finally clicking. A disgruntled wife's meltdown, or a terrorist attack on a corporate office. The men in suits tensed. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance. "FBI!" The shout preceded a dozen agents flooding the floor. "Everybody down!" Chaos erupted. Olive spun toward Susan, but Matthew was faster. He tackled her as the gun went off, the bullet shattering the glass behind us. I dropped to the floor as agents swarmed in, their weapons drawn. "Clear!" someone shouted. "Suspects in custody." Hands helped me up. Noelle, now free, pulled me into a fierce hug. "You okay?" I nodded, watching as agents led away the men in suits. Olive was being cuffed, her cold mask finally cracking. "The evidence?" I asked. "Safe." Noelle smiled grimly. The real USB drive was never in the necklace. That was just to make them show their hand. Matthew approached slowly, uncertainty in his eyes. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead where he'd hit the ground. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for all of it." I looked at him, really looked at him, past the lies and secrets, past the pain and betrayal. He'd tried to protect me by keeping me in the dark. But when it mattered, when the choice was between his secrets and my safety, he'd chosen me. "I know," I said, "but we're not done talking about this." "No," he agreed, "we're not." Outside the shattered windows, morning sun painted the city gold. Sirens faded into distance, and in the wreckage of my carefully constructed life, I felt something unexpected taking root. Not forgiveness, Not yet, but possibility. The hotel suite felt too large, too quiet after the chaos. I stood at the window, watching police lights pulse against neighboring buildings while FBI agents processed statements 12 floors below. Tea? Susan offered from behind me. Something stronger. She poured 2 whiskeys, joining me at the window. We hadn't been alone together since the truth came out. The woman I'd imagined from Matthew's stories, soft-spoken, gentle, bore little resemblance to the sharp-eyed operative beside me. "You could have told me," I said finally. "That night at Maxwell's. You could have trusted me from the start." "Would you have believed me?" "No," I smiled slightly. "But I would have respected the truth more than another lie." She swirled her drink, ice clinking. "When Robert died, I thought I was protecting Matthew by disappearing. Instead, I forced him to carry my secrets, to become like me." She met my eyes. "I never meant for him to do the same to you." "But he did." I turned from the window. "And now what? We all pretend to be a normal family?" "Normal is overrated." Noelle entered, still in her tactical gear. "Besides, you'd be bored. You're one to talk." But there was no bite in my words. The anger that had driven me for weeks felt distant now, replaced by something more complex. "The board members are singing," Noelle continued. "Olive's handler rolled on the whole operation. It's over." "Is it?" I asked quietly. A knock interrupted whatever she might have answered. Matthew stood in the doorway, looking uncertain. "Can we talk?" Susan and Noelle exchanged glances before slipping out. The door clicked shut with finality. Matthew stayed by the door, keeping his distance. Smart man. "The papers are ready," he said. "If you want them." Divorce papers. The simple solution. Clean break, fresh start. I'd been so sure that's what I wanted. "Did you ever actually trust me?" I asked instead. "Or was I just another cover story?" "You were the only real thing in my life." His voice cracked. "Every lie I told was because I couldn't bear to lose that." "But you did lose it. The moment you chose lies over truth." "I know." He took a step forward, then stopped. "But maybe we could try truth for a change." I laughed despite myself. "Just like that?" "No." He pulled something from his pocket, the diamond pendant. "Not just like that, but maybe like this." He set it on the coffee table between us. "What's this?" "A choice." He met my eyes steadily. "Inside is everything, every secret, every operation, every lie I've ever told. Read it, destroy it, turn it over to the press. Whatever you decide, I'll accept it." I picked up the necklace, feeling its weight. "And if I choose to walk away, then I'll respect that too." His smile was sad. "But I'm hoping you'll choose to stay. Not for the man you thought I was, but for the man I want to be. The man you make me want to be." The necklace caught the light, scattering diamonds across the wall. So much pain and deception wrapped in something beautiful, like our marriage. "I can't promise forgiveness," I said slowly. "I'm not asking for it, just possibility." I thought of that first receipt, how it had shattered my world, how each revelation since had forced me to rebuild myself stronger, sharper, more true. "Okay," I slipped the necklace into my pocket. "But we do this my way." "Which is?" "First, you're moving out. I need space to process everything without you there pretending nothing's changed." He nodded, accepting this. "Second, we start therapy. Real therapy where we actually tell the truth." "Done." "And third," I stepped closer, close enough to see the hope and fear warring in his eyes. "No more lies, not even small ones, not even to protect me, because I'm not the woman you married anymore. I'm someone stronger, someone who can handle the truth. No, he agreed softly. You're someone who demands it. I reached up, touching his cheek where a bruise was forming from the fight. He stayed perfectly still, letting me choose the contact. One more thing, I said. Anything. That red dress? I'm keeping it. Sometimes a woman needs armor. His laugh was surprised, genuine. It suits you. I stepped back, maintaining the necessary distance between us. There would be more revelations, more painful truths to face. The path ahead was uncertain. But for the first time since finding that receipt, I felt truly powerful, not because of secrets uncovered or justice served, but because I finally knew who I was. A woman who could face deception and emerge stronger, who could choose truth even when lies were easier, who could wear red not for revenge, but for herself.
That they had always dreamed of traveling the world together. And now that I was an adult, they felt it was the right time for them to pursue their own adventures. They seemed excited, but for me, it was a sudden and unsettling change. I was thrust into adulthood with nowhere to call home, feeling abandoned and unprepared for the sudden independence I was forced to embrace. Over the years, I managed to create a life for myself despite the rocky start. I worked various jobs, learned to budget tightly, and eventually found a modest apartment that I could afford on my own. Throughout this time, I had minimal contact with my parents. Our interactions were brief and strictly necessary. It was clear that our paths had diverged significantly since they left. Fast forward to 4 years later, I was 20 years old and had settled into a rhythm of self-sufficiency when, unexpectedly, my mother appeared at my doorstep. She was in tears, distressed by the news that my father had been unfaithful during their travels. Despite the shock of seeing her after such a long time, I felt a cold distance between us. Her pain, while real, didn't resonate with me as it might have before. I couldn't help but remember the years of neglect and emotional distance that had defined our relationship from my childhood. As I stood there, listening to her, memories of seeking their love and approval flashed through my mind alongside the harsh reality of their indifference. I recalled how I had once hoped that things would change, that they would see me and value me as their son. But those hopes had long since faded, replaced by the hard-earned strength that came from overcoming the challenges they left in their wake. With those thoughts in mind, I responded to my mother not with the comfort she sought, but with a stark reminder of the past. I laughed, more out of disbelief and a defense against old pains than amusement, and gently closed the door. It was a moment of closure for me, a sign that I had indeed moved on, and that the emotional ties that bound me to them were no longer as strong as they once were. Reflecting on that encounter, I realized that while the situation was unfortunate, it underscored the fact that I had grown into someone who could stand alone, resilient, and independent. My parents' choices had inadvertently taught me to rely on myself, and while the lessons were harsh, they were valuable. Now I was determined to continue building my life, with or without their presence, focused on my own happiness and well-being. Matters into my own hands. With my parents firmly set on selling our family home and pursuing their lifelong dream of traveling the country, they informed me that it was time for me to sort out my own life. They explained that they had been saving for this adventure for years, and now that I was employed and legally an adult, they felt no obligation to postpone their plans for my sake. This revelation came at a time when I had just started working and was barely beginning to save money. The prospect of renting an apartment was daunting. Even with roommates, the financial strain would be significant. I had envisioned starting college the following year, but the sudden need to secure housing threatened to derail those plans entirely. I attempted to reason with my parents, asking them to delay selling the house for just a few months to give me time to find my footing. However, they were resolute, driven by a desire to embark on their new life without delay. Their response was clear and harsh. My living situation was now my responsibility, and they felt no duty to help. The words my mother used that day, stating that they could do whatever they wanted with their property and that where I lived was no longer their concern, cut deeply and stayed with me. The conversation escalated into a heated argument, the biggest we had ever had. It marked the end of our communication. I knew then that they would not reach out to me again. Overwhelmed by frustration and betrayal, I lashed out, expressing my hope that they would face hardships as severe as they were imposing on me. In the heat of the moment, I didn't hold back, despite there being my parents and the age difference between us. After leaving the house that day, the reality of my situation set in. I had no family nearby to turn to. My parents had isolated themselves from relatives, and I had little connection with extended family due to their lack of involvement in family gatherings or holidays. My friends, meanwhile, were all starting their college journeys, making it impractical to rely on them for support. Faced with these daunting circumstances, I realized I had to rely on myself. I began searching for more stable and better paying jobs, looking for affordable housing options, and exploring every avenue for financial assistance that might enable me to pursue my education. This challenging period taught me resilience and the importance of self-reliance, shaping me into the independent individual I am today, which she wanted after such a long absence. The surprise visit from my mother, after years of no contact, left me both stunned and cautious. The last time we had spoken, it had been under less than favorable circumstances, and her sudden appearance at my doorstep was unexpected. At the time I found myself without a home, I took a significant leap of faith and reached out to a colleague from the supermarket where I worked. She managed the dress designer and had quickly become a good friend. We had a rapport that made our long shifts more bearable, and we often shared personal stories during our breaks. She understood my situation better than anyone, as she had faced her own struggles with family. She was a couple of years older than I was and had also skipped college initially due to her challenging family situation. Her father was battling addiction, and after he moved out, her mother made it clear she would no longer support her. Thus, since she turned 18, she had been working to save up for cosmetology school, aiming to become a professional dress designer. When I explained my predicament that my parents had sold our house and I was essentially homeless, she immediately invited me to stay with her. Her generosity in that moment was a turning point in my life. Despite her own financial constraints and living in a small apartment, she opened her home to me. For the first few months, I didn't pay rent, but contributed to groceries and other household expenses. As soon as I was financially stable, I began paying rent too. Our friendship deepened into something more, and before we knew it, we were indispensable to each other. We transitioned from friends to life partners, supporting each other's dreams and aspirations. I continued working at the supermarket, eventually earning a promotion to prestige teller due to my dedication and hard work. Meanwhile, my now wife was able to enroll in cosmetology school, balancing her studies with part-time work. Everything was going well until the unexpected day last week when my mother showed up, unannounced. I was caught off guard, especially because I had made it a point to not stay in touch with my parents after they had cut me off so abruptly. Her hug was overwhelming, and after regaining my composure, I had to take a moment to decide how to handle the situation. Despite the tumultuous past, seeing her after all these years brought a flood of emotions. I was torn between the hurt from our last interactions and the instinctive bond between a mother and her son. As I stood there, trying to reconcile these feelings, I knew that how I responded could redefine our relationship forever. Like I was more of an obligation than a beloved son. Throughout our conversation, I shared the details of my early life that I had kept to myself, detailing the emotional neglect and the profound sense of isolation I felt growing up. My wife listened intently, absorbing the gravity of my experiences, which had been largely hidden from her. When my mother unexpectedly showed up at our doorstep, declaring her need for a place to stay after my father left her for another woman, the moment was laden with complex emotions. She relayed that after their initial travel adventures, they settled in California. However, recently, my father confessed to an affair with a waitress and decided to leave my mom to pursue that relationship. My mother, now alone and nearing retirement, did not want to spend her savings on finding a new place amidst the pending divorce proceedings. As she stood there, bags in tow, assuming she could simply move in with me, I felt a surge of old resentments. Reflecting on the years of detachment and how she had once coldly told me I was on my own once I turned 18 because they wanted to sell our family home and travel, I decided to echo her words back to her. I told her that I was now the owner of my home and I couldn't take responsibility for her, reminding her of the exact words she used when she dismissed my needs years ago. The confrontation ended with me closing the door on her a mix of satisfaction and bitterness in my heart. However, the incident didn't sit well with my wife. Although she wasn't combative, she expressed her discomfort with how harshly I handled the situation. She suggested that perhaps I should reconsider my stance, offering a second chance to my mother. Her own experience of loss, having seen her parents pass away, informed her perspective, making her more empathetic towards familial reconciliation. After reflecting on her gentle prodding and reading various viewpoints online, I decided to discuss this further with my wife. I opened up about my painful past, which helped her understand why I reacted so strongly. Our conversation was deep and meaningful, helping to ease the tension that had bubbled up over the situation. She acknowledged that while the decision was ultimately mine, it was crucial for us to communicate openly to maintain the health of our relationship. This dialogue didn't resolve all the complexities of my relationship with my mother, but it was a pivotal step in considering what forgiveness might look like, and whether I could or even should revisit the decision to turn her away. My wife and I agreed to keep the lines of communication open as we navigated this challenging emotional terrain together. Growing up, I often felt like an outsider in my own home, and despite my best efforts to stay under the radar, it seemed to only make things worse with my parents. This background made it easier for me to turn away my mother when she suddenly appeared needing my help, after not bothering to check on me for 5 years. When she arrived out of nowhere, expecting me to take her in, it didn't stir the guilt one might expect. Instead, it reinforced my resolve because her presence was solely motivated by her needs, not a genuine interest in reconnecting. I had a candid conversation with my wife about the whole situation. She understood most of it already, but apologized for her initial reaction, explaining that she had been extra sensitive due to the recent loss of both her parents, her dad to addiction, and her mom to a heart attack. We managed to resolve our misunderstanding, and I'm relieved that we're on the same page again. However, dealing with my mother has turned into an ongoing ordeal. For some reason, she believes that harassing me on social media will coerce me into letting her into my life and home. Instead of taking a straightforward approach, like offering a sincere apology and waiting to see if things could mend over time, she chose to vent her frustrations publicly. She began crafting posts that painted my wife and me as heartless, claiming we were treating her with extreme cruelty at this vulnerable stage in her life. She even went so far as to create a fake profile to spread these accusations more widely, tagging me, my wife, and all our friends and family. It's bewildering how she's acquired such detailed information about our lives. My wife and I maintain private social media profiles. Friends and family tagged in her posts have been trying to report and take down the fake account, but we know this is likely just the first of many she might create. I'm reluctant to involve the police, as it feels like a major hassle, and both my wife and I are quite busy. But if her behavior escalates, we might have no choice. It's incredibly frustrating and annoying. I sometimes find myself wishing that my father would just take her back to spare us this drama. 3 weeks have passed since we initially refused her request to stay with us, and the situation has only intensified. She started showing up at the supermarket where I work, giving me hostile looks and lingering for about an hour and a half each visit, usually around noon. Her presence is disruptive and uncomfortable, and it's clear she's trying to provoke a reaction from me. It's more than an annoyance at this point. It's a continuous source of stress that my wife and I are forced to manage daily. We hope this situation doesn't escalate further into something that could affect us more seriously. For now, we're handling it as best we can, standing firm in our decision while preparing for whatever may come next. Despite my best efforts to keep a distance from her and focus on my work, my mother's persistence reached a new level. I've been successfully ignoring her attempts to intimidate me at my workplace for a whole week, and I thought perhaps she had finally given up. But just as I was enjoying the relief of not seeing her around, the situation took an unexpected turn. After my shift, as I headed to my car, I found her waiting there, not with anger this time, but looking visibly upset and worn out. It was clear she was not in a good place, and though our relationship had been strained, seeing her like this did stir a sense of concern. I didn't know where she was staying, and given her financial situation, a hotel seemed unlikely. However, I refrained from asking. After all, her accommodations were not my responsibility. She blocked my way to the car, insisting she needed to talk. After a few minutes of trying to bypass her, I finally relented. As soon as I acknowledged her, She broke down into tears, not just crying but wailing uncontrollably. I was not prepared for such an emotional outburst, and despite my feelings towards her, I couldn't ignore the obvious pain she was in. So I invited her to sit in my car so we could talk more privately, and she could compose herself. That my decision to engage with her wasn't out of familial obligation, but simply basic human decency. I haven't pursued legal action or police involvement mainly because of the practical burdens, time, effort, and money which I can't justify right now. Once inside the car, it took her a while to calm down enough to speak coherently. She then shared that since moving to California, things with my father had deteriorated significantly. Learning of his affair had devastated her, and the place they had once shared now only reminded her of the betrayal. She had returned, desperate and financially destitute, hoping I could offer some support. She admitted to having no money of her own, having quit her job to travel with my father years ago, and that she had even borrowed money to make the trip back to see me. Hearing all this, I was faced with a difficult decision. While our past was fraught with neglect and emotional distance, the person in front of me was clearly in distress and in need of help. This situation tested the very limits of my empathy and forced me to consider whether there was a way to assist her without compromising my own boundaries and the life I had built with my wife. While in California, my mother had adapted to life as a stay-at-home wife, depending entirely on my father for financial support. This setup crumbled when their marriage fell apart, leaving her with no job, no personal savings, and seemingly no one to turn to. She had lost touch with her friends here and didn't have family who cared to connect with her, which positioned me as her sole potential support. Her visit and plea for help left me feeling more disappointed than sympathetic. After listening to her, the best I could offer was some monetary assistance to help her manage her immediate expenses. But I made it clear that living with me was out of the question. Given our strained relationship and her past actions, I couldn't trust her enough to share my home with her. She expected more from me, which led to her reacting angrily when I set my boundaries. She abruptly left the car and slammed the door, a clear expression of her frustration, and walked away. Following that encounter, she didn't show up at my workplace, and I sensed she might have finally understood that I needed my space. The lack of her presence was a relief, as it had been an exhausting ordeal, and I hoped it marked the end of her attempts to involve herself in my life. It's been nearly a month without any attempts from my mother to contact me, and it seems she may have moved on. I discovered the likely source of how she obtained so much information about me in an old, public Facebook account I hadn't used in years. This account, linked to an outdated email, contained photos and tags of friends and locations that had inadvertently provided her with plenty of details about my life. I realized too late that she had likely used this account to learn about my whereabouts and connections. While I decided against trying to retrieve or secure the old account, as the damage was already done, this revelation was a reminder of the importance of digital privacy. I have not heard from her since, and while part of me hopes she's managing all right, I am human. After all, I firmly desire no further contact. My personal grievances aside, I wish her no harm, but I need to maintain my distance for my own well-being. Interestingly, a few of her friends reached out to me recently, informing me that she had contacted them for help after I had turned her away. This news was somewhat comforting, as it meant she might be finding support elsewhere, reducing the chance of her relying solely on me in the future. While I hope she finds the help she needs, I am committed to keeping our interactions minimal and focusing on my life with my wife, free from the past turmoil. However, these former friends had chosen not to respond to her outreach, a consequence of the years she had dismissed their attempts to maintain a connection. Now, finding herself in need, she discovered that the bridges she had neglected were not so easily rebuilt. They mentioned that she had been staying in a motel on the outskirts of town based on what she had shared in her messages. But since she had blocked them all, they assumed she had moved on and no longer needed their support. As time passed without word from her, I assumed that her situation had stabilized, especially with the impending divorce she had mentioned. It was nearly a year since our last communication, and surprisingly, she had not reached out, even though she had claimed financial instability. I was puzzled about how she planned to manage the divorce proceedings without any apparent resources. Then, at a cousin's wedding, a rare occasion for family gatherings, given my parents' usual absence, I learned through the grapevine of relatives that my mother and father had unexpectedly reconciled. This news was a shock, considering the depth of betrayal she had felt the last time we spoke. Curious about this abrupt turn of events, I caught up with some aunts who were always well informed about family dramas. They filled me in. A few weeks after returning to my father, my mother had laid down an ultimatum. She demanded that he choose between divorcing or reconciling, warning that if it came to a divorce, she would not go easy on him. As it turned out, my father had attempted to propose marriage to the waitress he left my mother for, only to discover that she was not interested in a committed relationship and was seeing other people as well. Realizing his mistake, he ended the affair and returned to my mother. In a twisted turn of fate, my parents were together again. I couldn't help but feel a sense of ironic relief. If they had split and moved on to others, they might have spread their dysfunction further. Instead, they were back where they started, and from the sounds of it, perfectly matched in their chaotic harmony. My wife and I couldn't help but laugh over the absurdity of the situation. It seemed that despite everything, things had worked out in a bizarrely fitting manner for them. They had become a bit of a joke among the family, which was no surprise to me. It felt like just the kind of outcome I would have expected from such a saga. Three years ago, my father retired as CEO of the research technician he founded. For nearly 7 years, he had assured me, a 27-year-old man, that I would succeed him as CEO. However, during his retirement party, which I had organized, he unexpectedly named my brother-in-law, William, as his successor. This announcement blindsided me, especially since I had dedicated 7 years to the company, whereas William had only been involved for about a year. William, 29, had been a part of our family for nearly 7 years, being married to my sister for 3 of them. While I recognized William's contributions and character, I was devastated by my father's decision and felt it deeply unfair. When I confronted my father privately, he explained his decision by stating that William exhibited more of the leadership qualities he valued than I did. He believed William would better serve the company's future. The reason my father considered me a disappointment stemmed from his perceptions of my mental toughness. A few months before his retirement, during a family dinner, I had inadvertently revealed my struggle with general anxiety disorder by dropping my prescribed anti-anxiety medication. Although my mother was understanding, my father was not supportive. He views mental strength as paramount and began to doubt my capabilities as a leader due to my condition. Despite my assurances that my anxiety had never compromised my work performance, my father accused me of using my diagnosis as an excuse and relying too much on medication. Following much reflection, he concluded that William was the better choice for CEO, believing he possessed the resilience and qualities similar to his own, which he found lacking in me. This decision and his explanation for it profoundly affected my respect for him and altered our relationship. He told me I was free to leave the company if I wished, but his lack of trust in my ability to lead it, as he had, was clear. He doubted my strength, unwilling to pass the reins to me despite earlier implications that I would be the next CEO. This realization struck me hard at his retirement party, prompting me to leave early and sever ties with my father. The pain of that night lingered. He chose to appoint someone else as CEO, a decision influenced perhaps by his perception of my anxiety as a weakness. In response, I resigned and soon after began a new job. The familial bonds frayed further when my sister accused me of attacking her personally by resigning in anger over the CEO decision, leading to a fallout between us. For the past 4 years, communication with my family has been minimal. I occasionally speak with my mother, who meets with me once a month, urging reconciliation with my father, but I remain uninterested. Recently, she frantically informed me that the new CEO had been arrested for tax fraud, implicating my father due to his association with the company. She pressed me to reconnect with my father, possibly to testify on his behalf, but I firmly declined. The risk of entanglement in a fraud investigation, possibly extending to other executives, was too great. I made it clear to my mother that I would not involve myself in the situation, arguing that if my father truly needed my help, he should reach out himself. The distance I've maintained from the company's turmoil, I believe, is for the best. My mother accused me of being childish and insisted that I should talk to my father to mend fences, emphasizing the family's need to unite during tough times. I found her demands unreasonable and stood firm on my decision not to reach out to him, which upset her further. She called me selfish and heartless, criticizing me for clinging to past grievances. I felt her comments were harsh, especially since she would likely struggle to forgive in my position after being overlooked for a CEO position I had dedicated 7 years to earn due to reasons beyond my control. It seemed unjust to expect forgiveness when my father hadn't even acknowledged his actions. Our conversation devolved into an argument where I bitterly mentioned that the troubles befalling him and the newly appointed CEO, William, were karma for how they had treated me. After a tense silence, my mother hung up, and later I discovered she had blocked me. Feeling isolated and regretful about my harsh words, I contemplated calling her back, but realized she had made it impossible. It's been a week since she blocked me, leaving me cut off not only from her but from any familial support. While my friends have been supportive, losing the last familial connection has been tough. Despite the fallout, I maintain that I wasn't wrong to express that the situation might be a consequence of their actions. My anxiety disorder, which my father faulted for my supposed inadequacies, doesn't hinder my leadership or work capabilities. His words at the retirement party left a deep mark on me, shaping my feelings and actions to this day. For the last 3 years, my father's outdated views on mental health severely impacted my self-esteem. It left me questioning every decision I made and feeling like an imposter at my new job. It took a considerable amount of time and therapy to begin addressing these unresolved issues. Despite these challenges, my performance at work remained unaffected, and I'm even being considered for a promotion. I believe my father made a significant mistake, and it's disappointing that my mother can't see that. She seems more interested in defending him than acknowledging the hurt caused to me. I've made it clear that I won't make the first move towards reconciliation. They need to genuinely apologize for their actions before I consider re-engaging with the family. Recently, my sister visited, visibly distraught over her husband's legal troubles involving a federal crime. Despite the tension, I couldn't turn her away and tried to offer emotional support. She was unaware of the issues until they escalated and expressed a desperate hope that I could use my workplace connections to help. She even mentioned that my boss's spouse is a court reporter and suggested I could leverage this relationship to aid her husband, offering to pay for any assistance. I found her request inappropriate and firmly declined. I explained that I could not involve my employers or their connections in such matters, nor did I want to compromise my professional standing or my moral principles. I had hoped she visited for emotional support, not to seek such a favor, and her request made it clear that our values were profoundly misaligned. When my sister approached me for help regarding William's tax fraud situation, I made it clear that while I harbored no personal animosity towards him, getting involved in any legal manipulations was out of the question. My decision was purely practical. I didn't want to risk being entangled in a scenario that could potentially jeopardize my own position. I was open to offering emotional support, but that was the extent of it. Despite this, my sister took my refusal hard. She accused me of holding a grudge against her husband over past events, specifically him taking the company position I had hoped for. I tried to clarify that my feelings were more about the situation itself than personal resentment towards William. Indeed, I might have felt a slight resentment, but it wasn't a grudge. William, in my view, wasn't significant enough to warrant such feelings. Unfortunately, my attempts at explanation fell on deaf ears. My sister accused me of being petty and selfish, echoing sentiments that our mother apparently shared. This led to a heated argument, and I asked her to leave my home. It was especially frustrating because, throughout my own challenges, she hadn't offered me the support I was willing to extend to her. Her actions seemed to echo a long pattern of taking personal digs at me whenever things didn't go her way. The argument escalated quickly, with both of us raising our voices until we were shouting over each other, unable to even understand what the other was saying. Eventually, she left, but the confrontation left me deeply upset. Reflecting on the situation, I felt a profound regret for maintaining contact with my family over the past 3 years, wishing I had distanced myself sooner. This ongoing turmoil with my family made me question the sincerity of the relationships we had. It seemed that the support I thought I had from my mother might have been superficial. The realization that I had possibly wasted years trying to maintain a connection that was ultimately detrimental was painful, reinforcing the notion that distancing myself might have been the better choice from the start. Even after my sister's hysterical behavior and the exhausting fallout, I find it incredibly hard to completely sever ties with my family. Memories of our childhood bond tug at my heart, making it all the more painful to think about our current strained relationships. It's disheartening, and I often wish it could all just be resolved. 4 days passed in silence after my sister's dramatic visit, which left me thinking perhaps they'd finally decided to leave me alone. However, today, my parents showed up unexpectedly. I was determined not to make the same mistake as I did with my sister, so I initially refused to let them in. I told them through the door that I saw no point in rehashing old arguments or wasting more time. Surprisingly, my father wasn't there to ask for help but to apologize. He admitted he had made significant mistakes, and although he knew his apology couldn't undo the past, he wanted to express his remorse. This apology caught me off guard. I hadn't expected him to acknowledge his actions, especially since the last time we spoke was the night he openly called me a disappointment at his retirement party. I listened as he apologized, and while I was thankful for his effort, I explained that forgiveness wasn't something I could easily offer. The pain from the past 3 years, coupled with his prolonged silence, couldn't be simply erased by his sudden acknowledgement of guilt. I told him I needed time to process everything and that I couldn't guarantee forgiveness. It's not just the initial betrayal that hurt, but also the prolonged period it took for him to recognize and address his wrongdoings. As he finished his apology, I braced myself for anger or an outburst, but instead, he expressed his willingness to give me all the time I needed, accepting that I might never want to rebuild our relationship. This moment was a significant turning point, revealing the complexities of family dynamics and the slow, often painful journey towards potential reconciliation. Even with his readiness to wait, the deep scars of the past made it clear that any path forward would be fraught with challenges. As we stood outside my door, my father shared a revelation about the past 3 years. He admitted that the decision he made was not just a mistake, but a deeply misguided one, influenced by outdated notions of mental toughness passed down from his father. He confessed that the men in his family were taught to see emotional struggles like anxiety as signs of weakness, excuses for not meeting life's demands. When he discovered I was taking anti-anxiety medication, his fear of the business failing clouded his judgment, leading him to doubt my capability to lead. He told me that after our fallout, he harbored resentment towards me, but eventually began to question his beliefs. As he learned more about anxiety, he even recognized some symptoms in himself. He had been contemplating reaching out to make amends when the scandal with William erupted, delaying his plans. Hearing all this left me feeling conflicted. While his apology didn't erase the pain of the past 3 years, it was a step toward understanding. I'm not ready to forgive him yet, and I'm still processing whether his remorse is genuine, but I'm open to considering reconciliation. I asked him to return home, saying I'd reach out if and when I was ready. He respected my wishes and left. During our conversation, my mother also apologized for her part in the misunderstandings and quick judgments she had made. She mentioned she had spoken to my sister, who she said also regretted her actions and wanted to apologize on her behalf. However, I felt that if my sister truly wanted to apologize, she should do it herself. Her current situation with William, while stressful, doesn't excuse her past behavior towards me. Now, most of my family has offered apologies, leaving me with a lot to ponder. This unexpected wave of contrition from my family is a lot to take in, and I need time to decide how or if I want to move forward with each of them. Deciding whether to accept my family's apologies has been one of the toughest choices I've faced. For 3 years, I lived without any real contact with them, except for my mother, and even our relationship has been strained. On one hand, I'm tempted to forgive and move past everything, eager to stop the constant replay of hurtful events in my mind. I don't want to be held back by lingering resentment. On the other hand, I'm unsure if forgiving them is the right decision, or if it merely allows them to escape accountability. The complexity of my feelings is compounded by my deep-seated longing for family connections. Despite everything, I miss them terribly, which only adds to my confusion. I've made it clear that I won't assist them with their current troubles, standing firm on my principles. This stance isn't about whether they expect my help, it's about maintaining my integrity. I've decided to take some time to think it over. After all, if their apologies are genuine and not just a desperate attempt to draw me back in during a crisis, it could mean starting to mend our fractured relationships might be possible. Fast forward to 4 months later, I've been busy with new developments in my life. Eventually, my sister, having dealt with her own issues with William, apologized in person. I gave her the same response I gave our parents. I would consider reconciliation, but it would be on my terms. After much thought, I agreed to slowly rebuild our relationship, starting with monthly dinners. The first dinner was awkward, but their efforts to amend our bond were evident. My father even offered me the CEO position at the family business, which I declined for now. I need more time to decide if I want to take on such a responsibility. Amidst all this, there's been a bright spot. I've started dating a longtime friend. She's actually the one who encouraged me to give my family a second chance. Our relationship has brought a lot of joy and new energy into my life, helping me balance the ongoing family dynamics with personal happiness. So far, things are looking up, and I'm content with where I am. Recently, I turned 16 and almost immediately found myself in a difficult situation with my parents concerning a trust fund my grandfather had left me, a fact I only discovered upon reaching adulthood. Growing up, my grandparents were my primary caretakers because my parents were often away for work. My father was a PMO manager, and my mother accompanied him on his travels, leaving me to enjoy a more stable childhood with my grandparents. Although I cherished the bond I shared with my grandparents, the absence of my parents throughout my formative years left me feeling unwanted. This feeling only intensified when, despite settling back in town to start a bakery, my parents didn't invite me to live with them, prolonging my stay with my grandparents for another 1 year. Recently, when I came of age, my parents demanded I hand over my trust fund to support their business, threatening to evict me if I refused. Feeling cornered and unvalued, I chose to leave home. Now, they unfairly label me as greedy, even though I simply wish to secure my own future. This situation has only deepened my sense of detachment from them. Although they made routine visits during holidays or my birthdays, these interactions felt obligatory and lacked warmth. They often seemed more interested in fulfilling a duty than genuinely connecting with me. Their approach was always formal, as if they were conversing with a business associate rather than their daughter. Reflecting on my upbringing, it's clear that while I always had a loving home with my grandparents, the emotional distance from my parents has been profoundly challenging. It's hard not to feel that they could have done more to make me feel like a valued part of their lives. Honestly, my grandparents raised me, not my parents. Legally, my parents are recognized as such, but I never felt a genuine connection with them. This disconnection has always been a source of heartache for me, and it's not just a feeling, it's a reality I've come to understand through some painful truths I uncovered over the years. One such moment happened when I was around 10 years old during my birthday. After the celebrations, everyone had left, and my parents were supposed to stay overnight. I was living with my grandparents at the time. As I was heading to my room, I heard loud voices coming from my grandfather's office. It was unusual because he was typically a calm person. Curiosity got the better of me, and I eavesdropped on the conversation. What I heard that night was heart-wrenching. My grandfather was confronting my parents about how they were neglecting me, warning them that their behavior could permanently damage our relationship. He stressed that they wouldn't always be around and eventually it would just be us. Despite no longer needing to travel for his job, my dad hadn't invited me to live with them, choosing instead to let me stay with my grandparents. The conversation revealed that while my grandparents loved having me with them, they were concerned about the odd and distant relationship I had with my parents. My grandfather believed it was crucial for my parents to make more effort to be involved in my life. To this, my father responded that I seemed happy enough with my grandparents and he was too busy with the bakery to act as a father. My mother echoed his sentiments, saying she too was overwhelmed with the business and household duties. They both admitted that taking on parental responsibilities wasn't a priority for them as they set up their business. I went to bed in tears that night, and it turned out to be the worst birthday ever. Despite a lovely party, the truths I overheard were too painful to forget. It became clear that in my parents' eyes, I was more of a responsibility they were obligated to deal with rather than a priority. This realization has stuck with me, shaping my views on our relationship and confirming the emotional neglect I always felt but could never quite articulate until that moment. After enduring the profound loss of my grandparents, who were essentially my primary caregivers during my formative years within a year of each other during the pandemic, I was left deeply devastated. My grandfather succumbed to complications from diabetes first, and just 9 months later, I lost my grandmother. Their deaths plunged me into a state of grief that I can only describe as depressive. I spent my days in a haze of sadness, barely functioning beyond watching TV, sleeping, and occasionally eating. This was a dark time. I felt like a zombie, simply existing without truly living. Reluctantly, I moved back in with my parents because I had nowhere else to go. My relationship with them, which had already been strained due to their earlier neglect and lack of involvement in my life, worsened as I struggled with my grief. I harbored a deep resentment towards them, irrational as it may sound, wishing it had been them instead of my grandparents who had passed. This thought was a clear indicator of my distress. Despite their financial stability, thanks to my father's successful career and the inheritance from my grandparents, my parents remained emotionally unavailable. They were preoccupied with their bakery, which had been struggling, and showed little concern for my mental well-being. They didn't suggest psychiatric help, which I felt I needed, nor did they attempt to engage with me or understand my suffering. Their indifference only deepened my sense of isolation and abandonment. Living with them felt like an ongoing battle, with each day intensifying my feelings of being misunderstood and neglected. The profound disconnect between us made it painfully clear that the only people who had truly cared for me were gone, and now I was stuck in an environment where my well-being seemed to be the least of anyone's concerns. This environment only served to exacerbate my depression and resentment, trapping me in a cycle of sorrow and anger. I often felt invisible to my parents, as if I could vanish and they wouldn't notice until it was too late. It's upsetting even to talk about how stifling and terrible living with them felt. However, that was the situation up until a couple of years ago when things slowly began to improve. As I started to recover from my emotional turmoil, I began opening up to my friends about my strained relationship with my parents. I had braced myself for judgment, but to my relief, they were incredibly supportive. My best friend since kindergarten, Ellie, was especially understanding. She not only offered her support, but also shared my situation with her parents, who kindly told me their door was always open if I needed help. This support was a lifeline that truly meant a lot to me. Over the past 1 year, my life has improved significantly. Despite my parents' continued indifference, I've learned to cope with my challenges with a little help from my friends. I decided to postpone college to gain some real-world experience. Even though most of my friends were heading off to university, I knew I had a college fund set up by my grandfather, which I could access once I enrolled. But I also needed to prove my acceptance to access the funds, according to the stipulations discussed with my grandparents' lawyer. Interestingly, a couple of weeks ago, their lawyer contacted me and revealed that I also had a trust fund set up by my grandparents that became accessible when I turned 16. This was meant to be a surprise, ideally shared with me by my grandparents if they were still alive. But unfortunately, that responsibility fell to their lawyer. The news came just after my birthday, and amid the emotional moment, I decided to make a social media post to express my gratitude towards my grandparents, who had always looked out for me. Reflecting on how much I missed them, I thought sharing these feelings online would help me process my grief. However, I quickly regretted making such personal sentiments public. I realized that some things might have been better kept private, as not all emotional moments need to be shared with the world. This experience was a poignant reminder of the complex ways we handle grief and the unexpected consequences of sharing our feelings in the digital age. I should have realized that keeping some things private would be wiser. Unfortunately, after I shared a heartfelt post about my grandparents' trust fund, my parents quickly caught wind of it, likely tipped off by a relative, since neither of them is active on social media, and I certainly hadn't added them. The very next day, they approached me, something they rarely do unless it's important usually to them and concerning money. They started off by mentioning how sweet they thought my grandfather's gesture was. Their uncharacteristic approach and the sudden interest in the contents of my post set off alarm bells in my mind. As expected, the conversation took a turn towards their bakery business. They explained that they were looking to expand, but were short on funds. They suggested that dipping into my trust fund would be an easy solution for them. They reasoned that they couldn't bring in investors at the moment because it wasn't the right time to sell shares, and they didn't want to risk more of their own money without guaranteed returns. Essentially, they were hoping I would provide financial help without expecting anything in return, essentially a donation to their business venture. I was astounded by their audacity. How could they expect me to simply hand over the money that my grandfather had specifically set aside for my future? They weren't just asking for a small portion, they wanted access to the entire fund to funnel into their business. I firmly told them that I would not be partaking in their plans. If they needed funds, they should seek out proper business loans or find investors willing to take a share of the risk. The money from my grandfather was meant for my educational and personal growth, not to bail them out of their financial mismanagement. Their frustration grew as I continued to resist their requests. Eventually, the conversation escalated to a point where my father, visibly annoyed, presented me with an ultimatum: help fund their business or leave the house. This confrontation highlighted just how much they were willing to leverage their own child's future for their ambitions, deepening the rift between us and solidifying my resolve to protect my inheritance and my future. My mother coldly informed me that I could either share the funds with them or leave their house, emphasizing that as an adult, they were no longer obligated to support or house me. The irony of their calling me selfish, when they had prioritized themselves over my needs throughout my life, was not lost on me. They framed their ultimatum as a fair choice, reflecting the real-world consequences of my decisions. But I sensed an underlying assumption on their part that I wouldn't manage without them. They couldn't have been more wrong. Despite their minimal involvement in my life, I had grown accustomed to relying on myself, and their latest demand only solidified my resolve. I didn't confront them directly after their ultimatum. Instead, I agreed to think it over, giving myself time to plan my next steps quietly. That night, I decided to leave. I had already discussed the situation with my best friend Ellie and her parents, who were more like a family to me than my own had ever been. They understood my predicament and offered me a place to stay for as long as I needed. This support provided me the safety net I needed to make a swift exit from my parents' home. Leaving without a word might seem harsh, but in my eyes, it was justified. My parents had never shown me the consideration that would warrant a formal goodbye. They didn't deserve an explanation for my departure because they had never extended me the basic courtesy or care a parent should. Predictably, when they realized I was gone, they were more outraged than concerned. They bombarded me with calls, but it wasn't until the evening that I finally responded. Their questions were not about my well-being, but rather about the trust fund and what I planned to do with it. This response was disappointing, but not surprising. I firmly told them that I had decided against sharing my inheritance. The money was meant for my future, as my grandfather intended, not to bail them out of their financial irresponsibility. I was clear that I would not be their charity case. It was a tough but necessary stance to protect my future and maintain my integrity. I had already made it clear to my parents that I wasn't interested in giving them any handouts. They had never prioritized me, and now, without my grandparents, I needed to prioritize myself. I'm quite certain that my grandparents left me this money specifically so I could support myself after they passed, knowing the kind of parents I had. I decided not to help my parents financially, and that decision was final. Since making my decision, my parents have been creating a stir, accusing me of being exceptionally greedy. They've even gone as far as bad-mouthing me to all our relatives and their friends. I've been bombarded with messages calling me greedy, which is frustrating and has led me to question my actions, despite reassurances from Ellie and her parents that I'm doing the right thing. It's tough, and I find myself wishing for an objective perspective to reaffirm that I'm not being unreasonable. The overwhelming support from some lovely comments online about my grandparents has been heartwarming. It reassures me that if my grandparents could see this, they would be proud. As for those reaching out to criticize me based solely on my parents' narrative, I realized I shouldn't take their words to heart. These people don't really know me or my story. They are just echoing my parents' side. In response, I decided to address everyone involved. I posted online that anyone who truly supports my parents should consider investing in their business themselves, rather than pressuring me to use my trust fund. I also publicly told my parents that their attempts to guilt-trip me were only strengthening my resolve. I made it clear they were manipulative and selfish, and they couldn't see beyond their own needs. My parents had given me a stark choice: share my trust fund or leave. I chose to leave, asserting my independence. If there's any greed in this situation, it's not coming from me. Their strategy to make me feel guilty has failed. Instead, it has empowered me to stand firm in my decision, sever ties, and manage my life and finances without their interference. After making my feelings clear and responding publicly to the people who criticized me, I decided to turn off my phone. I was done with the drama and had nothing more to add to the conversation. I was confident those I tagged would relay my message to my parents, so I felt a sense of closure and was ready to move on to the next chapter of my life. I knew it was time to start focusing on finding a job and an apartment. I'm deeply grateful for Ellie and her parents' generosity. They've told me I could stay with them as long as I need to, but I feel it's important to stand on my own feet. I don't want to rely on others indefinitely, not after depending on my grandparents, then briefly on my parents, and now my friend's family. With the support of my trust fund, I'm in a good position to take care of myself, so I'm optimistic about what lies ahead. It's been 4 days since I last posted online, and as expected, everyone I called out has blocked me. They've likely passed my messages on to my parents, who are furious. They sent a message saying they were cutting ties with me, which I calmly accepted and blocked them in return. This feels like a clean break, and honestly, it's a relief to be free from that negativity. On a brighter note, the search for an apartment is going well. I found a place and will be sharing it with a roommate, which I think is a responsible move. I'm excited about this new beginning and the independence it brings. I've officially moved out of Ellie's house. It was a bittersweet goodbye, especially since she's also heading off to college soon. Now settled in my new apartment, I've also landed a job in the community manager department of an advertising agency. I'm eager to start this new role and hopeful about what the future holds. My parents and I haven't spoken in the past few weeks, and I've been too busy to dwell on past conflicts. Life is genuinely good now, and I'm focused on building a future that would make my grandparents proud.
Their minds and refused to communicate with me. This left me heartbroken and in a very difficult situation. At the time, I was just starting out in my career, and I wasn't financially ready to live on my own. The suddenness of the eviction left me unprepared mentally and financially. The crux of the issue was my sister, Ellie, who was 34 at the time. Despite the age difference between us, which naturally created some distance, I never expected our relationship to take such a bitter turn. Ellie had been married to Noah, who was then 37, for 5 years. They seemed happy until she abruptly accused Noah of having an affair with my friend Ella, a claim that took everyone by surprise. Ella, who was 26, was actively working on gaining weight and had sought Noah's advice since he was a public health nutritionist. I was the one who introduced them, never imagining the chaos it would soon cause. One day, Ellie returned home distraught, claiming that she had filed for divorce because Noah had been unfaithful with Ella for the past 4 months. The allegation was shocking to me because both Ella and Noah exhibited characteristics completely contrary to those of deceitful people. Ella was a respectable woman, unlikely to engage with a married man, and Noah had always been devoted to Ellie. Despite my disbelief, my parents took Ellie's side without seeking any proof, choosing to believe their daughter over their son-in-law. The situation escalated quickly when Ellie blamed me for introducing Ella to Noah, claiming I had a hand in ruining her marriage. This accusation led my parents to make the hasty decision to expel me from our home. I tried to reason with them, but they were unyielding, forcing me out with nowhere to go. That night, I found myself sobbing on the sidewalk, surrounded by my belongings, utterly lost until a friend kindly offered me shelter. For years, I reached out to my family, trying to mend bridges, but to no avail. Then, nearly 7 years later, I received an unexpected email. It contained detailed explanations and evidence that refuted all the accusations against me and Noah. The truth about what really happened and the misjudgments made were finally clear. While this revelation brought some vindication, the years of estrangement and the pain of being unjustly ostracized by my own family could not be undone. The damage to our relationships had been profound, and the path to reconciliation, while now open, remained fraught with emotional turmoil. The unexpected catalyst for my family reaching out again. After all these years of silence, the engagement announcement on social media somehow made its way to them. Their reaction was not what I had anticipated. Instead of continuing the silence, I received a surprising message from my parents congratulating me, which opened the door to a very cautious reconnection. Reflecting back on everything, it became clear that my family had deeply entrenched the idea that I was at fault for my sister's failed marriage. My parents, perhaps influenced by their closer bond with Ellie and her position as the favored child, had reacted harshly without truly understanding the situation. They had told me they were disgusted by my supposed actions, a harsh judgment that seemed particularly unfair considering I was never involved in the alleged infidelity. This misunderstanding led to them blocking my phone number and even threatening legal action if I tried to approach them. In the weeks following my expulsion from the family home, I was completely cut off. I couldn't reach out to Ellie, Noah, or my parents to get any clarification or to defend myself. Noah, who also distanced himself by blocking me, left me with no direct way to challenge the accusations or to hear his side of the story. Both he and Ellie had moved back with their respective parents, leaving their shared home and making it impossible for me to find them. In my desperation for answers, I turned to Ella, the friend who'd been accused of the affair. Though we weren't close, I hoped she might shed some light on the accusations. When we met, she vehemently denied any romantic involvement with Noah, explaining that their interactions had been strictly professional. She even showed me proof of her stable relationship with her long-term boyfriend, to whom she was soon to be married. Her account contradicted everything Ellie had claimed and left me convinced of their innocence. Despite this revelation, I lacked concrete evidence to present to my family, which hindered any chance of reconciliation at the time. Forced to accept the harsh reality, I focused on rebuilding my life independently. I found a new apartment, dedicated myself to my career, and slowly healed from the emotional turmoil. The process was tough, but it redirected my energy towards personal growth and financial stability. Years later, as I celebrated my engagement, the joyous occasion unexpectedly bridged the gap between my estranged family and me. Their outreach, prompted by my engagement post, hinted at a possible thaw in our chilly relations. Though the past scars remained, this development presented a sliver of hope for mending ties that had been severed under false pretenses. As I move forward with my life, now enriched by my fiancé and a brighter future, I hold on to a cautious optimism about reconnecting with my family, acknowledging the complex journey of misunderstandings and revelations that led us here. That Noah could have fabricated such detailed evidence, and it finally painted the true picture of the situation that had uprooted my life so drastically. The revelation came as a shock. To think that all this time the story had been flipped. My sister, Ellie, was the one who had been unfaithful, not Noah. She had cleverly shifted the blame to Noah, accusing him of cheating with Ella, a scenario I had believed impossible given Noah's character and commitment to the marriage. The twist was that it was Ellie who had engaged in an affair with my friend William, a Prime Foods and sound engineer. William, who lived near Ellie's house, was someone I had casually introduced to her, knowing they shared a mutual interest in music. However, I had never anticipated the betrayal that followed. This anonymous email from Noah, sent several years after our last contact, and prompted by seeing my engagement announcement on Facebook, was a lifeline I didn't know I needed. My fiancée Olivia, who had inadvertently connected us through her wider social media circle, played an unintentional but crucial role in bringing this truth to light. Olivia's decision to share our engagement publicly had serendipitously bridged the gap between my past and present, showing just how small the world can be. Noah's email was detailed and impersonal, containing undeniable proof of the affair between Ellie and William. Screenshots of their intimate emails discussed their deceit, love for each other, and their plans to meet secretly, all behind Noah's back. These pieces of evidence were hard to digest, but they clarified many unanswered questions about the past. Ellie had not only lied about the affair, but had also tried to manipulate everyone into believing Noah was at fault. It was a revelation that turned everything I knew on its head. Understanding that Noah had felt uncomfortable about reaching out directly and chose to send an anonymous email made sense. He had been blocked by me during the heated moments following the breakup and had felt conflicted about reopening old wounds. However, his need to clear his name and share the truth outweighed the awkwardness of the situation. This unexpected disclosure did not erase the years of pain and estrangement, but it provided a sense of closure I desperately needed. It also opened up a path for potential reconciliation with my family, armed with the truth. The impact of this revelation was profound, not just in understanding what had truly happened, but also in beginning to heal the deep-seated wounds caused by years of misunderstanding and misplaced blame. Now, with a clearer understanding of the past and a fresh start with my fiancé, I felt equipped to confront the future with a newfound sense of resilience and hope. The journey ahead would involve mending relationships and building trust again, but with the truth now on my side, I felt ready to face whatever challenges might come. But I had something important to share that they all needed to hear. I had spent years estranged from my family, carrying the weight of accusations that had never truly belonged to me. It was time to clear the air. The emails, signed off with Ellie's middle name, an uncommon detail known only to those closest to her, were irrefutable proof of her deceit. For years, she had painted Noah as the villain, accusing him of infidelity, while she herself was the one entangled in an affair with my friend, William. The reality of the situation was twisted to her advantage, allowing her to garner sympathy and support from our parents during her divorce. After discovering the truth through an anonymous email, I connected the dots back to Noah thanks to the social media connections with my fiancée, Olivia. We met and discussed everything in detail. He explained how he had learned about Ellie's narrative from LA and had kept silent, unsure how to approach me after all these years. This silence had prolonged my suffering and alienation from my family, but upon learning the full extent of Ellie's manipulation, I couldn't stay away any longer. Noah and I decided it was time to confront the situation. We arrived unannounced at my parents' home where I hadn't set foot in over 7 years. My mom answered the door, and before she could fully comprehend the situation, we were inside. The living room scene quickly grew tense as my father and Ellie realized we weren't there for a mere visit. Despite my father's immediate threats to call the police, I stood my ground, driven by the need to expose the lies that had fractured our family. I explained everything to them, showing them the emails that proved Ellie's infidelity. The atmosphere was charged as the evidence contradicted the narrative they had believed for so long. Seeing the deception laid bare, the dynamics in the room shifted. Ellie, usually the couch potato who relied heavily on our parents, had no work or excuses to hide behind. It was a moment of reckoning for her and a pivotal one for me. The confrontation wasn't just about vindication or unraveling lies, it was about seeking a resolution to years of pain and misunderstanding. I hoped that by bringing everything to light, there might be a path to reconciliation. Not just with my parents, but potentially with Ellie too, despite the deep betrayal. As the reality sank in, the possibility of rebuilding our family under the shadow of truth rather than the veil of deceit loomed on the horizon. It was a daunting but necessary step towards healing and possibly forgiving. The road to recovery would be long and fraught with challenges, but standing there, in the home I once knew, I felt a cautious optimism about mending the broken ties. After all, understanding the full story was the first step towards forgiveness and, hopefully, a more honest and open family relationship in the future. She keeps finding ways to contact me. It's exhausting, really, but I'm firm on not letting her drama drag me back into the chaos. The day we confronted my family with the truth about Ellie's deception, it was as if years of built-up tension and mystery unraveled in just a few moments. Noah and I presented the divorce documents alongside screenshots of Ellie and William's emails that exposed their affair. My parents were shocked, not only by the revelation, but also by the additional sting that Ellie had to part with our grandmother's cherished diamond ring to settle the divorce, a ring that held sentimental value far beyond its monetary worth. As we laid out the facts, Ellie tried to dismiss herself from the living room, likely overwhelmed by the evidence stacked against her. Noah detailed the circumstances to my parents, and I filled in the gaps, explaining how the false narrative had cast me out for years. The atmosphere was thick with betrayal and disbelief. My father, initially hesitant, demanded a straightforward explanation from Ellie. However, when it became clear she was still weaving lies, he decided he had enough. He packed up her things and handed her the bags, echoing the expulsion I had faced years ago. This time, though, it was Ellie pleading for sympathy, not me. As Noah and I left the house, my resolve was firm. I had been vindicated, but the cost was high. The family dynamic had been irrevocably altered, and while part of me felt satisfaction at seeing karma in action, another part of me was just tired of all the drama. Recently, Ellie showed up at my doorstep, desperate and tearful, demanding I intervene on her behalf with our parents. It was surreal seeing her so unraveled, especially considering how she had once convinced everyone that I was the problem. I refused to help, telling her that our debts were now settled. She left a message on my door, accusing me of being vengeful. Maybe I was, but after everything, I felt justified. Despite the turmoil, I have no regrets about bringing the truth to light. The whole ordeal has only solidified my decision to distance myself from Ellie. She continues to attempt contact, hoping to elicit sympathy or assistance, but I remain detached. Her lifestyle changes, having to pay for her own living expenses, are a consequence of her actions, not my responsibility. So now, as I reflect on everything that's happened, I stand by my decisions. I've blocked her number again, and any lingering guilt about the repercussions she's facing has dissipated. It's time for me to focus on my future with Olivia, free from the shadows of the past. As for Ellie, I hope she finds a way to rebuild her life, but it will be without my involvement. Amidst the chaos of preparing for my wedding with Olivia, my parents suddenly appeared out of the woodwork, wanting to reconnect after spotting our engagement announcement on Facebook. They expressed a desire to attend the wedding without even offering an apology for their past actions. It was baffling to see them act as if nothing had happened, assuming they could just walk back into my life for such a significant occasion. Olivia and I could only shake our heads and laugh at their messages, which seemed almost surreal in their disconnect from reality. The situation escalated when Ellie, undeterred by my previous warnings, dramatically threw herself across my car one morning, refusing to let me leave for work. Her actions forced me to call the police, and she was taken away while still trying to paint herself as the victim. Despite pressing charges, I knew my parents would bail her out, and I was right. They even had the audacity to send me a lengthy text afterward, criticizing me for being too harsh and calling their betrayal an honest mistake. Their message was almost comical in its lack of self-awareness. They seemed to forget the years of hurt and betrayal that led to my estrangement, expecting forgiveness and kindness as if they had merely misplaced an item, not nearly destroyed my life. I responded firmly, reminding them that they had lost any right to dictate my actions or judge my decisions long ago. Returning from work, I found yet another message from them, this time inviting Olivia and me to dinner to sort things out before the wedding. They claimed they were giving both their children a second chance, as if I had been at fault in the past. Olivia and I laughed at their audacity. It was clear they still didn't grasp the extent of their actions or my resolve. I wrote back one last time, making it clear that I had no interest in reconnecting or attending any dinner. I was content with my life as it had been for the past 7 years without them. Their so-called forgiveness and offers of reconciliation meant nothing to me. With that final message, I blocked them, cutting off any further attempts at communication. Olivia is now my family, the only one I need. My parents and Ellie have shown repeatedly that they are incapable of seeing beyond their own needs and desires. If they try to reach out again, they'll find themselves talking to my lawyer instead. This chapter of my life is closed, and I'm looking forward to a future with Olivia, free from the shadows of the past. I recently got married at 24 to my husband after 4 years together. Instead of the beach wedding we dreamed of where we've shared many happy moments, our ceremony was a small, intimate affair at his aunt's farmhouse. I had saved up for 3 years for my job as editorial photographer, hoping for a grand celebration by the sea to share a beautiful, luxurious time with our guests. However, our plans dramatically changed a few months back when my parents urgently requested to borrow $210,100 from me. They claimed it was for a critical medical treatment for my father, whose sudden illness was supposedly due to complications from diabetes. They mentioned needing an expensive imported drug not covered by their insurance. Concerned for my father, I provided the funds without hesitation, believing I was helping cover essential medical expenses. Over time, I grew suspicious. My mother dodged my requests for medical reports, and my father, though always in bed during my visits, didn't seem convincingly ill. I didn't confront them initially, fearing the repercussions if my suspicions were wrong. Amidst this, I found out my brother Jack had already left for his honeymoon in Europe, funded by my parents using the money I lent them under the guise of a medical emergency. He hadn't planned to tell me until after returning, hoping to surprise everyone with stories and photos. This revelation came only because I mentioned our father's supposed condition, prompting him to address my concerns. Feeling deceived and taken advantage of, my husband and I opted for a quiet wedding on the farm, keeping it a secret from my family who had misused my trust and funds. This situation has strained my relationship with my parents, leading to significant financial and emotional repercussions for them as I withdrew my financial support. After Jack got married, he went on a lavish honeymoon funded by our parents. This detail only came to light after I reached out to him, concerned about our father's health. Initially, when I received a request from my mother to lend $210,100 for an urgent medical treatment for my dad, I didn't hesitate. She mentioned a rare, expensive drug that wasn't covered by insurance, and given my father's supposed critical condition, I felt compelled to help. Over time, however, my visits and observations didn't align with the severity of the illness portrayed by my parents. My dad didn't seem as ill as claimed, and my requests for medical documentation were consistently evaded. Doubts crept in, but I held back from accusing them without concrete proof, not wanting to create a family rift over potentially unfounded suspicions. The truth unraveled when I discussed my concerns with Jack. He mentioned enjoying an extravagant honeymoon, unaware of any health crisis at home, which was jarring considering the urgency conveyed to me. He revealed that our parents were covering his honeymoon expenses, which included stays at top-tier hotels, fine dining, and extensive shopping, all amounting to around $270,710. It dawned on me then, there was no medical emergency. My parents had concocted the entire scenario to divert my wedding fund to Jack's honeymoon. I felt a deep sense of betrayal upon learning that the savings I had carefully put aside for my dream beach wedding were misused. When confronted, my parents admitted they fabricated the medical emergency, rationalizing it was the only way I'd part with the money, as they wanted to give Jack a memorable gift without tapping into their retirement savings. They believed I was young and capable of earning back the money, but this was a crucial moment for Jack, who needed a break from work-related stress. Their justification did little to ease my anger. I had been saving diligently, living modestly, and planning meticulously to fund my own wedding. My parents' actions not only misled me, but also forced me to scale down my wedding plans drastically. I insisted they repay me before my wedding. I needed those funds to cover the significant costs associated with a beach wedding, which my husband's family was helping with but couldn't fully fund. My parents had made it clear early on that they could either pay for my college education or my wedding, not both. I chose education, knowing I'd self-fund my wedding. This situation led me to reconsider my wedding plans entirely, opting for a smaller, more intimate ceremony at my husband's aunt's farmhouse. While this wasn't the wedding I had envisioned, it became a celebration of our love, untainted by the deceit that overshadowed my original plans. When Jack began college, I casually asked him if our parents had forced him to choose between funding for his education or a wedding, just as they had with me. He laughed off the idea, which suggested that he hadn't faced the same ultimatum. I didn't press the issue with my parents at the time. I was still financially reliant on them as I hadn't secured a job yet, and I didn't want to stir up any family drama by pointing out their apparent favoritism. Years later, this issue resurfaced dramatically when I confronted them about using my wedding fund money I had diligently saved over 3 years to finance Jack's extravagant honeymoon. Despite their denials, it was evident they favored him. I insisted they repay me, refusing to compromise my dream wedding because of Jack's job struggles. They could pamper him on their dime, but it was unfair to redirect my hard-earned savings. They responded that they couldn't return the full amount before my wedding and expected it to take years to repay. They argued that nothing was more important than family, rationalizing that if I was willing to pay for a medical emergency, I should be willing to prevent Jack from potentially falling into depression. However, Jack's work issues stemmed from his casual attitude toward his web designer sales job, where his income was largely commission-based. He wasn't seriously troubled by his job performance. He simply wasn't accustomed to striving hard due to a lifetime of being coddled by our parents. I stressed to my parents how vital this wedding was, not just to me, but also to my future in-laws, as I had commitments to fulfill financially that would now be impossible without the funds. Yet, my parents maintained they couldn't refund the money in time for the wedding. I found myself pleading with them, but they remained unmoved, assuring me they'd eventually repay the sum, just not in time for my needs. I left their house in tears, feeling utterly defeated. When I shared everything with my husband, his frustration matched mine. He was just as disappointed and angered by their empty promises and lack of empathy for our situation. Furious and even more frustrated than I was, my husband considered contacting a lawyer. However, I explained that there would be no point because all our agreements with my parents had been verbal. There was no written evidence that my mother had claimed the money was for medical expenses or that she had promised to repay it. We had no contracts, documents, or even text messages to support our claims, which made a legal case not only weak but also potentially expensive and fruitless. Reluctantly, we decided against pursuing legal action. Instead, we focused on adapting our wedding plans, which felt like a more constructive use of our energy and resources. In a fortunate turn of events, my husband's family stepped in. His aunt generously offered her farmhouse as a venue for free, which, although it wasn't the beach setting we had envisioned, was a beautiful and welcoming space. Upon visiting, I immediately felt a connection to the place. It was perfect for us under the circumstances. With the venue secured, I threw myself into planning the wedding, which became a welcome distraction and solidified my decision to cut my parents out of my life and the wedding. I was initially uncertain about inviting Jack. He hadn't known about the funding switch, so his direct fault was minimal. However, when he returned from his honeymoon and scolded me for demanding the money back from our parents, claiming I was making a big deal out of nothing, and insisting I just suck it up and scale down my wedding, it clarified things for me. His lack of empathy and understanding removed any doubt about not inviting him as well. As the plans progressed, the reality of having a less extravagant wedding than originally envisioned settled in. Surprisingly, this worked out for the best. The scaled-down wedding was not only beautiful, but also more reflective of who we truly were, not the image we thought we needed to project. It was intimate and genuine, filled with people who truly supported us. In hindsight, the constraints imposed by my parents' actions and the subsequent reduction of our wedding budget stripped away any pretense and highlighted what was truly important, celebrating our union with those who cared for us without conditions. The day was perfect because it was truly about us, a celebration of our love and commitment rather than an extravagant display. Reflecting on the decision to scale back the lavish wedding plans initially intended to impress, my husband and I chose a more meaningful path. We used our budget thoughtfully, focusing on what truly mattered, being surrounded by those who genuinely cared for us on our special day. The outcome was a dreamy, beautiful ceremony without the unnecessary pomp, proving that a wedding doesn't have to be grand to be memorable. After the wedding, I shared photos on social media, intentionally after everyone invited had strictly ensured the secrecy to avoid drama from my parents and Jack. Given our strained relationships, they were not informed about the wedding. Their absence allowed us to enjoy a peaceful, intimate celebration without their interference. However, the day after I posted the wedding photos, my parents and Jack, seeing the posts, confronted me in a phone call demanding to know why they hadn't been invited. Surprisingly, they seemed to expect an invitation despite our last painful interactions where I left their house in tears after a heated argument and hadn't spoken to them since. Similarly, my last conversation with Jack had left me feeling blamed and dramatic. I explained to them that after they had misused my wedding fund, I had to drastically cut costs, choosing to invite only close family and friends who genuinely supported us. They were not included because of their actions and the hurt they had caused. Feeling unapologetic yet firm, I ended the call and blocked them, hoping to move forward without further conflict. However, an hour later, my husband relayed that Jack had contacted him, sharing that my mother was devastated by my words, having cried to the point of nearly fainting. Though possibly an exaggeration, this made me feel a surge of guilt. I wondered if I had been too harsh despite their betrayal. Now, a week later, I'm left contemplating the consequences of my decisions during and after the wedding. It's a complex mix of relief for having a beautiful wedding true to ourselves and a lingering sadness for the family rift that has deepened, leaving me to ponder if things could have been handled differently. After that last intense conversation with my parents and Jack, I decided to cut off communication with them. My mother's tears wouldn't change the truth of the situation. On the day I confronted them about the misuse of my wedding fund, I was the one in tears, desperately pleading for them to return the money before my wedding. They dismissed my feelings, treating the matter lightly. So I resolved to do the same distance myself and minimize their impact on my life. It's true what they say, you reap what you sow. I explicitly told Jack to stop contacting both me and my husband. My husband was unrelated to these family issues, and I wanted to shield him from their petty antics. After sending that message, I blocked Jack to cut off any remaining access they had to me. My family had mistreated me for years, and I was determined not to tolerate it any longer. While a lawsuit seemed a far-fetched idea given the lack of tangible evidence, my husband believed it was worth considering. He began consulting with a reputable lawyer, and we planned to decide soon on whether to pursue legal action. Our goal was to somehow make them admit they had misled me about the emergency to funnel my money into Jack's lavish honeymoon. Proving this in court would be challenging, but I felt compelled to hold them accountable. I deserved to have my money returned, and I was prepared to do whatever necessary to ensure that happened. Yesterday, I reiterated to Jack the importance of keeping my husband out of our family drama. Ironically, this led him to do the exact opposite. After work, my husband informed me that my parents and Jack had bombarded him with texts, demanding he convince me to unblock them. When he ignored their messages, they escalated the situation by showing up at his workplace. They waited outside and followed his car when he left, honking until he pulled over knowing they wouldn't relent and might follow him home. He decided to confront them directly to prevent further disturbance at our house. They met at a nearby diner where they could discuss things privately. At the diner, Jack approached my husband's car window and insisted they talk in person. Inside, Jack expressed his belief that our parents were deeply hurt by my actions and that family should come first, suggesting that we should reconcile. However, my husband, having seen the distress and manipulation I'd endured, supported my decision to maintain distance. We both agreed it was crucial not to let their guilt tactics sway us from protecting our peace and pursuing what we felt was right. After the last tumultuous conversation with my parents and Jack, I decided to cut ties completely. My family believed my decision to sever contact over the mishandling of my wedding fund was excessive and even accused me of overreacting by suggesting we weren't family anymore. They tried to reach out through my husband, hoping he could persuade me to reconsider, emphasizing that family should stick together despite the monetary issues. They also reiterated their promise to return the money, but insisted it couldn't be done all at once, citing Jack's work struggles and their impending retirement as reasons for the delay. My husband played a key role during this interaction. Instead of confronting them directly, he cleverly made them feel heard, suggesting that a heartfelt message from them might help resolve the conflict. Naively, they took his advice, thinking it might soften my stance and lead to reconciliation. Little did they know my husband was subtly steering them to admit their actions in writing, providing us with the evidence we needed to pursue legal action. I have to admit, I'm quite impressed and even a bit proud of how ingeniously my husband handled the situation. He's my evil genius. His strategy paid off, and soon we received an email from them outlining all their deceptions and essentially confessing to their misuse of my funds. This email was the admission of guilt we needed to move forward legally. We are now working with our lawyer to recover the $210,100 money that represents 4 years of hard work, careful saving, and many personal sacrifices. It's not just about the amount, it's about justice and the principle of the matter. My parents and Jack made their choices, and now they must face the consequences of those actions. In the midst of this legal battle, we've also started planning our honeymoon. We're opting for a modest getaway to the beach, a place of special significance for us, marking both the beginning of our relationship challenges and a spot where we've shared countless happy memories. This decision reflects our realization that happiness doesn't require grand gestures or excessive spending. After all, the essence of our life together comes from enjoying simple, meaningful moments. This experience has been a profound reminder that we control our happiness and the direction of our lives, not the expectations or actions of others. Now, we look forward to focusing on our future, filled with love, integrity, and the simple joys that bring us true contentment. When I, a 25-year-old man, decided to celebrate my engagement with Ellie, my school sweetheart and partner of 8 years, it coincided with my younger brother James's recent graduation from community college. In the midst of our celebrations, my parents requested that I cancel our engagement party to make way for James's graduation party, a demand that led to unexpected family drama. I had sent out invitations for our engagement party, scheduled for last weekend, just 3 days after proposing to Ellie. It was an exciting moment for us, one we wanted to share with our friends and relatives. However, upon sharing our plans, I was taken aback when my parents and James urged me to cancel, revealing their own plans to host a graduation party for James on the same day, a detail they had not previously mentioned. Given that our invitations were already distributed, and considering the importance of our engagement, I suggested that they could reschedule James's event since they hadn't yet sent out their invitations. This solution seemed reasonable to me, but it wasn't well received. My parents, who have historically shown a preference for celebrating James's achievements, were disappointed by my decision. This wasn't the first time I felt overshadowed by James. My childhood and adolescent milestones were often downplayed compared to his. For example, my 5th birthday was a low-key event with a few friends, whereas James's was an elaborate theme party. This pattern continued through our school years, with his achievements always celebrated more grandly than mine. Despite these differences, I maintain a cordial relationship with my family, exchanging greetings on special occasions and offering congratulations on milestones. However, my decision to proceed with the engagement party, rather than accommodate another event for James, has caused a rift, with many relatives choosing to attend my celebration instead. This situation has stirred mixed feelings within our family, highlighting long-standing dynamics that have now come to the forefront during what should have been a joyous time for everyone involved. While my interactions with my family were generally polite, we rarely kept in touch. Neither my parents nor I had any expectations of frequent communication, and we all adapted to this arrangement in ways we deemed appropriate. My relationship with my younger brother James was also strained. Growing up, we often argued or exchanged jabs, and by high school, we had mutually decided it was best not to speak. James's personality and behaviors, shaped by my parents' indulgent treatment, made him challenging to get along with. Despite his troublesome behavior in high school and a failed product management venture with a startup that involved selling graphic printed t-shirts, my parents remained uncritical and supportive, even when his business flopped and they lost their investment. When it came time for James to attend college, his grades and gap years limited his options to community college, where he pursued a business degree. Amidst these developments, I got engaged to my longtime girlfriend, and we planned an engagement party. Coincidentally, my parents decided to throw a graduation party for James on the same day as my engagement party. They hadn't sent out invitations yet when I announced my party plans, and when informed, they demanded I cancel or reschedule mine. I found this demand unreasonable, especially since my invitations were already distributed. I suggested they could reschedule their event, but they were displeased with my stance. During a heated phone call, my parents accused me of being antagonistic toward James. Trying to avoid further conflict, I firmly stated my intention to proceed with my engagement party as planned, then ended the call and chose to block them to prevent more distressing interactions. In the days leading up to the parties, my relatives received invitations to both events, causing confusion. I opted to stay out of the drama, informing them they were welcome to attend either event and I would respect their decision. Despite hoping for a good turnout at my own celebration, I didn't want to pressure anyone. However, I later discovered that my parents were actively discouraging relatives from attending my engagement party, falsely claiming I had scheduled it to clash with James's graduation intentionally. Faced with their smear campaign, I felt compelled to clear the air. Without resorting to dishonesty, I communicated with all invited guests, explaining the true sequence of events and the conversation that had transpired with my parents. By sharing my side of the story openly, I aimed to counteract the misinformation and maintain my integrity amidst the family turmoil. From my early childhood, I've always felt overshadowed by my brother James, who is the celebrated child of our family. This pattern of favoritism persisted, and though I had come to terms with it over the years, I couldn't agree when my parents expected me to postpone my own engagement celebration to accommodate another event for James. I made it clear to my relatives that if they chose to believe my parents' side of the story over mine, it would be best if we didn't keep in contact. My message was straightforward, and although I was anxious about their response, the support I received was overwhelming. Many relatives, especially those of my generation, immediately expressed their understanding and assured me of their attendance. The night of the party was fantastic. Almost everyone invited showed up, and it was clear they didn't buy into the false narrative my parents were pushing. People at the party shared that they recognized the unfairness I had faced growing up and applauded me for standing up to my parents' unreasonable demands. The engagement party was a huge success, not just in terms of fun, but also in affirming that many family members recognized the disparity in how my parents treated James and me. This validation was incredibly fulfilling. However, the next morning brought a challenging situation. My parents and James showed up at my doorstep, eager to confront me. They accused me of sabotaging James's celebration out of jealousy, a claim that couldn't be further from the truth. They revealed that hardly anyone attended James's party, and those who did left quickly, likely to attend my engagement party. They were upset about the message I had sent around, explaining my side of the story. In the heat of the moment, I defended my actions, explaining that I had been forced to clarify the situation because they were trying to smear my reputation with lies. Unfortunately, they weren't receptive to my explanations and continued to accuse me aggressively. It was evident that no productive conversation could happen in such a heated atmosphere. Ellie, seeing the futility of the discussion, firmly told them to leave or she would call the police. They left reluctantly, hurling insults as they went, and James slammed the door on his way out, rattling the windows with the force of his exit. This confrontation was painful but underscored the deep-seated issues within our family dynamics. It highlighted the need for clear boundaries and possibly a more permanent distance to avoid further conflict and preserve my and Ellie's peace as we planned our future together. Shortly after my parents and James stormed out, I received a message from an unknown number, likely used by a friend or someone from their side since we had blocked all their numbers. The message expressed disappointment in my decision to hold my engagement party on the same day as James's graduation. They mentioned that James was self-conscious about graduating at 29, and that his business failure had left him with little to celebrate, claiming they were merely trying to lift his spirits. They admitted to speaking poorly of me out of desperation for his party's success, and even offered an apology, but it felt tinged with manipulation. This message left me and Ellie feeling quite conflicted. On one hand, the apology could be genuine remorse. On the other, it seemed like another tactic to sway our feelings. Despite the confusion, I knew this was a classic case of manipulation, clouding genuine emotion with calculated moves. Over the years, my relatives have always been supportive, and in their defense, they've done what they could. They've tried to mediate and have spoken to my parents about the unequal treatment between James and me, though without success. My expectations from my parents had diminished long ago, and as long as I was financially independent, I was content. I've maintained good relations with the rest of my family and made it clear during the party that I didn't expect anyone to choose sides between us and my parents or James. Most of my family attended my engagement party, and I was satisfied with that, appreciating their support without demanding they sever ties with my parents or brother. Reflecting on the comments from an earlier discussion I had shared online, I realized that I had no reason to apologize for how I managed the situation. I continued to keep my parents and James blocked, including the unknown number from which they had contacted me. I messaged back stating my preference to not communicate further and asked them to respect my space. For the next few days, there was silence from their end, which was a relief. However, things took a turn when, just as Ellie and I were preparing to leave for work, my mother showed up at our door. Unlike previous encounters with both parents and James, it was just her this time. Known for being quieter and more composed, I decided to let her in, hoping we could engage in a more mature and calm discussion. Once inside, she expressed her intent to talk to both Ellie and me. It seemed like an opportunity to perhaps mend some fences, or at least clarify misunderstandings without the heightened emotions of previous confrontations. When my mother arrived at our home, she initiated the conversation by expressing regret over the recent tumultuous events and offered an apology on behalf of herself, my father, and my brother. While I appreciated the gesture, it felt insufficient. True remorse, I believe, would have involved all two of them personally expressing their apologies, not just sending my mother as a messenger. My mother then mentioned that although she acknowledged their mistakes, she was upset about an incident during their last visit. She respected my decade-long relationship with Ellie and even considered her like a daughter. However, she was perturbed because Ellie had threatened to call the police on my father during that visit. She felt this was disrespectful and believed that Ellie, not yet officially family, owed them an apology for her actions, as did I for not intervening. I was taken aback by this claim. The sincerity I had hoped for in my mother's visit seemed overshadowed by another set of demands, this time for apologies from us. Frustrated, I responded that while I recognized her effort to make amends by coming over, it was misplaced. I was disheartened that even in a calmer, one-on-one setting, she was unable to see past their own grievances to genuinely reconcile. I explained firmly that Ellie's reaction was justified, considering my parents had shown up uninvited and created a confrontational atmosphere right at our doorstep. It was they who had escalated the situation by immediately hurling accusations and screaming, not us. I stressed that whether or not they saw Ellie as family was irrelevant to me. She was my family and had every right to defend our home and her space. I made it clear to my mother that neither Ellie nor I owed them an apology. In fact, at this point, I did not desire one from them either. I asked her to leave since the conversation was going nowhere, and her presence was only prolonging the conflict. She resisted at first, unwilling to accept this boundary, but I stood firm. Our discussion grew heated, and eventually she stated that if I truly wished for no further contact, they would oblige. After she left, Ellie and I were significantly delayed for work, but I felt a resolution had been reached, at least temporarily. This painful interaction seemed to finally set the boundaries I had long needed with my family. Moving forward, I decided that any future uninvited appearances at our home would result in me calling the police. I hoped this clear stance would deter further disruptions and finally allow Ellie and me some peace. 5 weeks have passed since that day, and while Ellie and I had hoped the issue would settle down, it seems there might be new developments involving my parents reaching out to Ellie's family. Ellie and I have been together for a decade, and over that time, our families have become quite familiar with each other. Living just a couple of blocks apart, our parents occasionally cross paths. However, one late evening, my parents decided to visit Ellie's parents unexpectedly. They wanted to discuss what they called our horrible behavior. At first, Ellie's parents were hesitant to let them in, aware of our recent disputes, but they didn't want to turn them away outright. Once inside, my parents began to lament their perceived failures in raising me, contrasting my actions with James, whom they praised as the epitome of a good son. They described how James chose to live at home, supposedly to care for them in their old age, though the reality that he couldn't afford to live on his own was the unspoken truth. As my parents continued, it became apparent to Ellie's parents that they might have been slightly tipsy. The conversation soon turned to Ellie, accusing her of disrespect during their last encounter, claiming she had changed for the worse since our engagement. They even hinted that her quiet and shy demeanor had been a fade. My parents then revealed their brilliant plan to Ellie's parents. Neither set of parents would pay for our wedding, hoping this financial pressure would force us to apologize and fall in line. Unsurprisingly, Ellie's parents didn't entertain this plan. They called us shortly after my parents left, recounting the bizarre episode. We couldn't help but laugh over the absurdity of it all. I was relieved that Ellie's parents, being the level-headed and understanding people they are, didn't take offense. They reassured us not to worry and resolved to simply not let my parents in next time. Grateful for their understanding, I decided to take additional measures. I planned to unblock my parents just long enough to communicate clearly that they should not bother Ellie's family or anyone else, warning that any further interference might lead to legal action. Although it was more of a bluff, I hoped the stern warning would deter them from any further disruptions. Since then, almost a year has passed, and I've maintained no contact with my parents and James. These months have been incredibly peaceful and fulfilling. 3 months ago, Ellie and I got married in the presence of loved ones. The wedding was wonderful, and we recently returned from our honeymoon. My parents and James didn't reach out, which was a relief as it spared us any potential drama. Now, as we settle into married life, I'm looking forward to spending the rest of my life with Ellie. With her by my side, I feel equipped to handle whatever comes our way, undistracted by familial strife.